people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist? You're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs? Fuck you. War.
Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War.
This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Friday, May 16th, 2025, the 117th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Apologies for the late start. I had something come up. It required my attention this afternoon. Now it's over, and here I am. So we're having a Friday evening show for perhaps the first time. And what a joy to be able to experience it all with you. I hope you had a great week at work or, lounging at home and scrolling the internet or whatever it is you do. I don't know what you do. Am I supposed to know what all of you do? I can't know that. And if I could know that, I still wouldn't want to not because I'm not interested in you, but because that would be prying. I'm not that kind of person. All right, let's get into some silly stuff and then some domestic stuff. Then we are going to head into the geopolitical sphere in the second half of the show. I feel like that's how I have come to line these up lately, and it seems like it works. So whatever, we're just going to give it a shot. We're going to see how it goes. Now, in January of 2024, I didn't mean to do this, but I ended up devoting an entire episode to Taylor Swift, or at least most of an episode to Taylor Swift and her presence in pop culture, the possibility that her relationship with Travis Kelce was something that was manufactured by PR organizations and talent managers between the NFL and Taylor Swift, record companies, producers, etc. Something that was manufactured. They put them together. This will be a perfect television story. The American people will watch this story. They'll be wrapped up in this relationship. It's like Ben and Jen on People magazine or Brad and Angelina, but we're going to put it on TV during the NFL. And we're just going to pump it all the time. And everybody's going to pay attention to the biggest pop star in the world. And you know what else we're going to do? We're going to have her support Joe Biden. And if Taylor Swift supports Joe Biden, that means that Joe Biden can definitely defeat Donald Trump, despite having done an absolutely terrible job as fake president for 4 years. It was an interesting media ploy that in many ways never came to be. So Donald Trump addressed Taylor Swift on Truth Social this morning, and it seemed a little odd, to say the very least. But you might remember that last year he said he hates Taylor Swift online. That's such a strong term. You might think, man, Trump couldn't actually mean that he hates Taylor Swift. That's overboard. It can't be hate. And who knows? We are in the midst of an information war, and we're talking about the world's greatest narrative manipulator, Donald Trump. So he updated his stance on Taylor Swift today and said, has anyone noticed that since I said I hate Taylor Swift, she's no longer, quote unquote, hot? Now, I haven't noticed that because I pay absolutely no attention to Taylor Swift, but I guess that I could see how her not being thrown in front of me to the point where I realize something is happening with Taylor Swift might mean that she's not hot anymore. So cool. I hope that that's the world we're embracing, where I don't have to ever think about Taylor Swift ever again. And then there's this piece of truly extraordinary and weird news. Although, to be fair, once we get into the article, the headline maybe overplays it a bit. But this is from Newsweek, and of course, it's been reported in outlets all over. Human remains found near Taylor Swift's mansion. What we know. A human leg bone was discovered close to Taylor Swift's home on Rhode Island, police have said. Why isn't it in Rhode Island? You wouldn't say on California or on New York. Rhode Island is a state. It's in Rhode Island. Also, was the leg bone connected to the hip bone? The bone was discovered on Wednesday morning on Everett Avenue in the Watch Hill neighborhood of Westerly. The town's police department confirmed. Westerly Police Chief Paul Gingerella told Newsweek via email, currently no foul play is suspected. So I guess perhaps the leg bone just fell out. Investigators are awaiting official confirmation of the identity of the remains, he said, adding the case remains under investigation by the Westerly Police Department Detective Division. So it also lets us know that Taylor Day, a Westerly resident, was driving past the scene as investigators arrived. She said it was probably a couple football fields away from Taylor Swift's house and the Ocean House. Maybe that's a business, a restaurant or something there. I would never expect anything like that, especially not in Watch Hill. And that's because it's a very wealthy community. Hugh Jackman and Conan O'Brien have spent time there. She's hosted 4th of July parties with a bunch of pop stars and actors. And she bought the house in 2013 for $17.7 million. So I don't think that this is her primary residence. Maybe one of you is a Swiftie and know better, but a few hundred yards away from someone's vacation home, I'm not sure if that means that there is any reason to consider any involvement. And I would suspect that there probably is none, although naturally the internet is running wild. Did Trump post about his Taylor Swift hate because of this? Maybe he read the article. Maybe he thought to himself, I haven't heard anything about Taylor Swift in an awfully long time. And he just let everybody know, hey, you thought Taylor Swift was hot? Apparently she's not that hot. Okay. Now, that wasn't his only pop star oriented post today. And I people are like, maybe Taylor Swift is an op. Maybe all that thing that she's been doing politically and the rest of it is just to illustrate some sort of point, right? The white hats have everything under control and Taylor Swift is under control. Hey, man, maybe. I don't know. All right. I don't know. But like, there's not any proof of that, So maybe we just make sure to always know that maybe that's not how things are going. Is Bruce Springsteen a white hat? he expresses the same political views he's always expressed. So there's no reason to believe that. But hey, anything's possible. Donald Trump says this morning, I see that highly overrated Bruce Springsteen goes to a foreign country to speak badly about the president of the United States. Never liked him, never liked his music or his radical left politics. And importantly, he's not a talented guy, just a pushy, obnoxious jerk who fervently supported crooked Joe Biden, a mentally incompetent fool, and our worst ever president who came close to destroying our country. If I wasn't elected, it would have been gone by now. Sleepy Joe didn't have a clue as to what he was doing, but Springsteen is, quote unquote, dumb as a rock and couldn't see what was going on. Or could he? Which is even worse. This dried out, quote unquote, prune of a rocker, his skin is all atrophied, okay, ought to keep his mouth shut until he gets back into the country. That's just, quote unquote, standard fare. Then we'll all see how it goes for him. Okay, well, what is going to happen to Bruce Springsteen when he gets back in the country? Born in the USA, but apparently not there now. And despite being born here and having that birthright citizenship, he apparently doesn't like duly elected American presidents. It's unfortunate. So unfortunate. Anyway, who knows? Trump's going to be Trump. He's weighing in on everything. Could just be some like kind of wrestling kayfabe, you know, where he's playing the enemy, creating enemies. The other day, you know, my friend Burning Bright has pointed this out in a series of posts, but Trump talked about how sometimes you need enemies and sometimes you do need enemies to be able to communicate what you need to be able to communicate. And I think he means it in that sense. I think that that is right on. I saw a Rumble rant in the chat. Chewy26. Chris, you should have several million followers like Shapiro's Diner and enough subscribers for you to be eating well. Your perspective is always a breath of fresh air. I'm a sub on Substack. Here's a little extra. Thank you very much, Chewy. I really do appreciate that. Yeah, you know, I think part of it is the censorship. Part of it is the fact that I am totally adverse self-promotion. And I also don't want to spend all my time that's not doing this show and not researching on the project of creating clips and then posting those clips on social media and tending to the social media responses and getting involved in the discussions on social media and going back on Twitter and trying to get Instagram and Facebook and the rest of it. You know, you're going to limit yourself like that. I knew that going in, and that's certainly part of it. And then there are a bunch of, again, not even just censorship, but kind of external restrictions in how far our message is allowed to get out. I think that at this point, that's pretty obvious to most people. And then, of course, there's the fact that I do long shows. I talk about things in ways that normies don't understand. And so there are some accessibility issues that, again, are my fault. And I understand that and I accept that. And it means that my show is not going to be as big as potentially it could be. But, you know, we're trying to ultimately move minds to a place where the brainwashing has all or largely subsided. And then people can just listen to things and have their attention operate in a way that it has been conditioned not to operate. And I hope that we get there someday. Maybe at some point I'll think about changing formats or whatever it is. You know, I could spend my time writing Fox News style scripts and read those scripts every day. I could do that. But yeah, I don't see that as being the right move for me. Maybe someday. We'll see. But anyway, thank you for your compliment and thank you for your financial support. All right, so we have to. The other day, people like this. And I'm glad, obviously, when people like things, but you know, I never know what stuff's going to tickle the funny bone of everyone. And the other day, we talked about the gift plane, and I said, never look a gift plane in the emoluments, and people found that amusing because, like, never look a gift horse in the mouth. That was the reference, in case that didn't come through clearly. But I have a gift plane update, and this is from Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma speaking to Jake Tapper on CNN.
The United States take a 747, but here's what's interesting to me. What the media isn't telling you, what no one's talking to you about, is this same 747 has been in negotiations for a year. The Biden administration is the one that started these conversations. It didn't start with the Trump administration. Why? Because we need a backup for Air Force One. Because right now, the president of the United States is flying around on a 40-year-old plane, and there is no backup for it. The backup we had, the airframe started having structural issues. No one's discussing that part. They're just discussing that the deal ended with President Trump. Maybe the media doesn't know. Maybe I'll give them a pass. Maybe you didn't know. I'll give you the pass. I'll give you a pass on that one. But the fact is, this conversation started with Qatar.
So the Biden administration started the conversation with Qatar to get this plane, and now Trump has it. I wonder what else was going on during that time. Now, it was during the Biden administration, but was Joe Biden dealing with the same people in Qatar that Trump's dealing with? And that's how the plane came to be? That, my friends, is a bridge too far. There is no way I would ever buy that bullshit. And I'm not saying that what Mark Wayne Mullen right there just said is bullshit. I'm saying that there's no way that the fake president Joe Biden was negotiating for this new plane with Qatar, and now Trump's getting it. But an hilarious wrinkle on that story. Okay, moving ahead in the world of the absurd, which has become just a major part of our news cycle. Formerly, maybe these stories would have been nothing, but now they are just everywhere. We talked the other day about Pam Bondi and how she was largely a TV character, and that Todd Blanche and Emil Bove were put in their positions at DOJ as her underlings in some sense. I don't mean to say that in a derogatory way, but deputies. I don't know what each's official title is offhand, but that Pam Bondi was being used primarily as a TV character. She was going out on Fox News and telling the country what it needed to know about the goings on at the DOJ. Well, here we have this from the Wall Street Journal today. DHS is considering reality show where immigrants compete for citizenship. And right there you have Instagram influencer Kristi Noem, who is the face of the DHS. Department spokeswoman Tricia McLaughlin said she had spoken to the producer of the proposed television reality show and that consideration of the idea was ongoing. It is, quote, in the very beginning stages of that vetting process, end quote, she said, adding, quote, each proposal undergoes a thorough vetting process prior to denial or approval. So that could just be as simple as this proposal came to us. We have to examine this proposal and vet it, and then maybe we will deny it, but it's our responsibility to go through this. And then the show or the story becomes the DHS is considering doing this reality show so that illegal aliens can win citizenship. And then people freak out. Oh, it's like the Hunger Games. It's not like the Hunger Games, they say. The pitch for the proposed citizenship competition show comes from Rob Warsoff, a producer and writer whose credits include the Duck Dynasty reality show. Warsoff, who emigrated from Canada, told the Wall Street Journal that the show is meant to be hopeful and a celebration of what it means to be an American citizen. This isn't the Hunger Games for immigrants, Warsoff said. Immigrants already in the system would compete in various contests, including potentially on American history and science. Warsoff stressed that losing contestants wouldn't face deportation. This is not, hey, if you lose, we are shipping you out on a boat out of the country, he said. Well, good to know. Skipping down. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem's tenure as the department's head has been marked by a made-for-TV style that has prioritized publicity, at times at the expense of operations. The Wall Street Journal previously reported the department has earmarked more than $200 million for an ad campaign featuring Noem telling immigrants in the country illegally to go home. $200 million for an ad campaign telling immigrants to go home. On a recent trip to the El Salvador super prison, where the Trump administration has incarcerated hundreds of men without due process, Noam posed in front of the prisoners sporting perfectly styled curls and a $50,000 Rolex watch. So what? Remember last fall when I was like, hey, there's an inordinate number of TV characters being put into Trump's administration. I wonder what's going on with that. I mean, the whole thing's fake. All of this is a TV show. The point of the Trump administration, the point of Trump's presidency is to destroy and eliminate the administrative bureaucratic deep state. None of these agencies should exist. We don't need competent people to run these agencies. What we need is people competent to let the public know what these agencies are supposed to be doing, what they've been doing, see the difference. Let's get rid of the agencies. Now, I don't know if we're going to get all the way there, but this seems to be the strategy, and they've gone on with the strategy, and they keep doing television-oriented things. To think that there's not a program at the White House or whatever level it's being run from for media communications on behalf of the Trump administration, and then potentially also on behalf of the Republican establishment or whatever part of the uniparty right still remains in power. There are all sorts of info ops playing out right now. Okay. The Patriots might be in control, but not of everything. Control could mean other things too. We talk about it often on Devolution Power Hour, the idea of the playpen. It's the idea is basically you put a baby in a playpen, total freedom within the playpen, but they can't get out of it. So there's a limit. Ultimately, there's a control, but anything that happens within the confined space is fine. It's also like this. If Mike Tyson is in a boxing match with a 4-year-old, and now I know that Mike Tyson would never beat the hell out of a 4-year-old, at least not modern day Mike Tyson, just saying. But I know Mike Tyson would not do that. But if Mike Tyson did do that, the 4-year-old could box as hard as he wanted to, and it would not matter. The entire time, Mike Tyson would be in control of the fight, okay? They could be putting out full effort to destroy Mike Tyson, and at no point would Mike Tyson ever not be in control. Doesn't mean he's directing the activity or the actions of the 4-year-old. It just means that at no point is he not in control. Okay. And so there's a lot of ways these things can work. I do believe, I should say, that there are multiple info ops for different purposes being disseminated. And that is why I am so intensely focused on trying to discern which info ops are headed in the right direction and which info ops are headed in the wrong direction, but selling themselves to us as though they are aligned. Okay. It's not to make people mad about Republicans or to doom out or to black pill or be depressed. I don't think any of those things. I just also think that the game is not over. The game is never going to end because this is what life is. It's a battle between good and evil and right and wrong. And there's no point at which, you just get to stop fighting. Oh, everything's taken care of now. The big people have got it. Trust the plan. Yeah. Okay. We can trust that there is a plan. We can trust the plan is a good one. We don't know the plan. And at some point, if everything is a plan created by humans, what kind of world is that? That's a world where if we are saying, yes, thank goodness you have the good plan, everything you're doing is fine. We accept this. Now the good side is in power. You are a groveling statist at that point, which is the problem with the trust the plan crowd. Groveling statists. Polymath Anon in the chat, $5. Have a wonderful weekend, Chris, and all here now. APL thinks your platform should be bigger, as we all do. Love you, brother. No homo. Hey, Polymath, love you too. But you don't need to say no homo. I know there's no homo. Nice one. Steve Claybaugh, I saw jumped in there with a Rumble Rant, $10. Thanks, Chris. Here's a small tip. I'm working on a truck while listening. Pennsylvania is representing. Well, thank you, my friend. Steve is a constitutionalist of the highest order. And I have greatly appreciated our conversations over the years. Okay, let us continue. Here is another one that I think is a little absurd, but it's an interesting dynamic we're playing with here. This is from Politico this week. I think maybe Wednesday. Let me check. Tuesday. It's all Biden. Top Harris advisor blames former president for 2024 loss. Okay. So it's Joe Biden's fault that Kamala Harris lost a fake election that there was zero chance she could possibly win, because elections are fake and they are battles of narratives. And Donald Trump had already won the battle of narratives well before Kamala ever entered the fray. To the extent that Kamala was actually put there for a chance to win, maybe they thought the entire country might just have a problem only with Biden and be like, okay, well, yeah, Kamala's exactly what we needed. Well, that immediately didn't work, and it obviously didn't work. And there was no way in hell it would have ever worked, because Kamala Harris is retarded. And this week, I don't know if I'm going to be able to find this. I didn't pull it up because I didn't think to. But man, oh man, there was. Remember Kamala Harris with the coconut tree? I don't know if people remember this. I'm trying to find, if I can, the speech. Oh man, I just want a video of this. I'm not going to find it. Maybe I can get it on YouTube. Hold for processing. I'm sorry to do this. There we go. This is going to work. Yeah, this is going to work. Let's go for the short version. We don't need the whole version here. Oh man. Let me see how I can do this. All right, hold on one second. Gosh, this is terrible. Now I'm really feeling like I'm up against the clock. The clock is ticking. All right, here we are. I present to you the coconut tree, and I hope that this brings back memories of how things used to be.
My mother she would give us a hard time sometimes, and she would say to us, I don't know what's wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you. So all of this is part of the work of this group of extraordinary leaders who will help inform and advise.
What in the world is that lunatic talking about? First of all, I cannot possibly believe that her mother was more retarded than she is, because I guess her mother was a doctor or something. I mean, you know, the whole nepotism thing and the global regime shuffles people around across the world to different countries, and they came here to be political infiltrators and hatch Satan spawn. But yeah, coconut tree. Did her mom really ask her? I don't know what's wrong with you, young people. What, did you just fall out of a coconut tree? What? Okay, let's go back to this article in Politico. So the top campaign advisor here is David Plouffe, who was not only on Kamala's campaign, but he was the campaign manager for Barack Obama. He wrote the book, A Guide to Defeating Trump, I think is what it was called, for the 2020 election. And in that book, he said he thought Democrats needed to get 65 million votes or so, or 70 million votes to be for sure certain to beat Donald J. Trump in 2020. And they got 81 million. His wildest dreams were like 70 million, and he got 81 million real lawful American votes. Isn't that incredible? So yeah, David Plouffe also in 2020, rather than working for Joe Biden, he worked for Mark Zuckerberg's Center for Tech and Civic Life and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and implemented the election malfeasance operation on behalf of Mark Zuckerberg. So to the Politico article, the perspective shared by David Plouffe underscores a frustration held by some Democrats that Biden's reluctance to remove himself earlier from the White House race sealed the fate of Harris's election bid. Discussing the impact Biden's withdrawal in July of last year had on Harris's chances, Plouffe described the then vice president's less than 3-month bid for the White House as a effing nightmare. And it's all Biden. He totally effed us. Plouffe, who was also manager of former President Barack Obama's 2008 campaign and a senior advisor in his White House, told the authors of the report. And we can leave this there, but I bring this up because this week we also had reports about Joe Biden's dementia. I guess Jake Tapper's writing a book. Somebody else is writing a book. Oh man, I wonder if I still have this Chuck Todd clip from the other day. I think I played it on Tuesday evening on OnlyLands. Here we are. Watch this. It's unbelievable. These people, actually, we'll do the video and then I'll tell you what I think. I don't mean to reiterate my point from the other night, but I think it's relevant here.
All right. Senator Chuck Schumer, I know you got to go. I appreciate your time today. We'll see you soon, I hope. Thank you.
Take care.
All right. And our panel joins us now. CNN political commentator Jonah Goldberg, the host of the Chuck Toddcast, Chuck Todd, Democratic strategist Paul Begala, Republican pollster Kristen Soltis Anderson, both CNN political commentators. Chuck Todd, go.
He is among the people that are responsible for this. The leaders of the Democratic Party, the staff of the White House. And I have to say, I find everybody now talking to these authors, get out of here. Go home. You're part of the problem. Now you tell us? So I find, the reason why the Democratic Party has less credibility today. Here's an unpopular president, and the Democratic Party has a worse rating than the Republican Party with this catastrophic governance that we've seen over the last 120 days. And yet, why is the Democratic Party in worse shape? Because of this distrust, because of this, frankly, what the public feels as if the party leadership let them down and let this happen. He's as responsible as anybody else. He was a leader in the party. He could have said something sooner.
Yes. The problem was that Chuck Schumer didn't tell the media that Joe Biden was having problems in the brain region. That's the problem. Hey, Chuck Todd, you say that you are a journalist. What journalists are supposed to do is figure out the things that the government isn't telling you and tell them directly to the people in as honest a way as you can muster. That's your job. Not waiting for the White House to tell you, hey, our president has come down with the retardation. We're going to swap him out now, even though that's not in the rules. What are these people thinking? I love it, though. This is the media. This is what they do. It's not their responsibility. They are there to transcribe phone calls from intelligence agencies, the military-industrial complex, corporations, and political parties, and dutifully type it all up exactly how they need so that the message can be communicated to the public, so the public does what the corporation or the political party or the government wants them to do. That's journalism. Hey, that's just journalism, folks. Congratulations, Chuck. Almost said Tuck. His name's not Tuck. Beachside, $5. Chris, we just lost the AAA credit rating, and it's being blamed on Jerome Powell from the National Pulse. Well, Beachside, let me tell you, that's what I had already in the hopper. So wonderful timing, or I timed it right, reading it at that moment, right before I was bringing up that article. So here is the article from the National Pulse. U.S. loses AAA credit rating because of Jerome Powell's reckless behavior. The Moody's rating agency downgraded United States debt for the first time, knocking the country out of its elite AAA prime rating to AA1, which the agency considers to be high grade. According to Moody's, the decision, which was announced late Friday, well after markets had closed, was based on increased U.S. deficits and growing interest costs. Successive U.S. administrations and Congress have failed to agree on measures to reverse the trend of large annual fiscal deficits and growing interest costs, the agency said in a statement explaining the decision to downgrade American government debt. The move is likely to further roil U.S. Treasury bond markets, which have seen high volatility following President Donald J. Trump's Liberation Day tariff announcements. However, the likely culprit for the downgrade is the intransigence of the Federal Reserve in the face of growing calls for the central bank to lower U.S. interest rates, despite growing indicators that inflation has subsided entirely and that the country may be facing a far more concerning deflationary threat. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell and the central bank's Federal Open Markets Committee have thus far refused to cut rates since its last reduction, which occurred shortly before the 2024 presidential election. Okay, so we're going to see what that means. I have a feeling it's going to mean nothing. Now, it's interesting that it's happening totally separate from any talk of a government shutdown. I remember government shutdown talks from the Obama administration when I would be listening to talk radio online. And I was liberal then, so I was listening to liberal talk radio, and they would be freaking out about a government shutdown. We're going to lose the credit rating. Okay. That was the worst thing that could ever happen, losing the credit rating. That's why you don't want the government shutdown. And yes, of course, all those poor federal workers who are going to get furloughed, not paid until the government starts back up again. That's the reason why we can't shut down the government. We have to keep spending trillions of dollars without even passing a budget. We just do omnibus bills and must pass legislation that includes this massive spending, debt ceiling hikes, etc. So this is the grave threat that we were always told would be a worst case scenario for a government shutdown. And now it's happened on a Friday afternoon. And will it matter? It's not even, it's here. I always try to figure out what stuff the regime's focused on by looking at mainstream websites. CNN right here has it in, I guess, what would be the third most important location. So it's not even top of the page for CNN. They're talking about a Trump, a SCOTUS decision that they believe is bad for Donald Trump. Whatever. We're going to actually get to that in a little bit. All right. So let's keep moving here. Hold for processing. All right. This is from Fox News. DNI Tulsi Gabbard fires deep state heads of National Intelligence Council to root out politicization of intel. Tulsi Gabbard, another TV character, used to be Tucker Carlson's substitute host when Tucker was out. Okay. DNI Tulsi Gabbard has fired the top officials leading the National Intelligence Council, whom whistleblowers describe as radically opposed to Trump, and has moved the agency to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, or ODNI, so she can block any politicization of intelligence, Fox Digital has learned. Gabbard fired Mike Collins, who was serving as the active chair of the National Intelligence Council, and his deputy, Maria Langen-Rieckhoff, Tuesday. Senior intelligence officials told Fox News Digital. Now, I find this particularly interesting because we talked about the National Intelligence Council just the other day. We talked about, where is it? I remember where I put it. We talked about this report from the National Intelligence Council. You will, I imagine, remember it by sight if you were watching last week. Have I successfully pulled this up yet? No, I have not. Here we are. This is the National Intelligence Council's report on Tren de Aragua. And the interesting thing about this report, as we went through at some length last week, is that it made it clear that Tren de Aragua is not a Nicolas Maduro problem. In fact, Nicolas Maduro has seen Tren de Aragua as an enemy of his. And he has said that Tren de Aragua was brought to the United States by the fake and illegitimate Biden administration, which just means Biden being the avatar for the administrative deep state, and the FBI and the DEA. So very interesting, in my estimation, that that report comes out, and then immediately this leader of that group, the National Intelligence Council, is removed. Now, did he oversee this report, the compilation of this report, and the dissemination of this report? The timing would suggest that he has, but the timing of an announcement of a firing relative to that report, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, was dated for, oh no, this is a month ago, so 7 April. So it's very possible then that he was involved with this report somehow, and I want to keep an eye on this just to see. Maybe I'll try to go back in and see if Mike Collins has any statements about Venezuela or Nicolas Maduro in the past. It could give some indication to what the influences were in compiling that report, which is what made me think that this article was so interesting. Let us go back to that Fox News article. Collins also has whistleblower complaints against him for political bias and deliberately undermining the incoming Trump administration. Now, I can't imagine that that report in any way undermines the Trump administration, so I doubt that the firing was connected to that report. They added that Collins was closely associated with Mike Morrell, the former deputy director of the CIA, who worked to write a letter in 2020 claiming that Hunter Biden's laptop had all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation and to get signatures from top intelligence officials. So that is a big deal for sure. He was part of the 51 former intelligence officials' letter. As for Langan Rekoff, officials said that she has been a key advocate for DEI and is someone who, whistleblowers allege, is radically opposed to Trump. So they are removing members of the deep state within the intelligence community. That is how that sounds. So it is good to hear that more people are being shown the door. Now, we're going to get into some court stuff. This is from CNN yesterday. Federal Appeals Court deals major blow to Voting Rights Act. The ruling, which leaves enforcement of the VRA's key provision to the U.S. Attorney General, comes as the Trump Justice Department is gutting its civil rights division and pivoting away from the traditional voting rights work. The DOJ, for instance, dropped major lawsuits previously brought against Texas and Georgia. And one of those Georgia lawsuits, the one that they're referring to here, was the one that we took note of a couple of months back because it came on the same day that Judge Nina Totenberg, wait, is Nina the Amy Totenberg? Nina and Amy are sisters. One of them is on the radio. I think that's Nina. So I want to say Amy Totenberg is the judge in Georgia. Someone can check me on that in the chat if I got that wrong. She dismissed Curling v. Raffensperger, the case about the election fraud machines down in Georgia, a case that has been running since 2017. Or sorry, 2017. A very long time. dismissed that on that. The Justice Department dismissed this case in Georgia on the same day that Judge Totenberg dismissed for standing after 8 years Curling v. Raffensperger. And I thought that those were connected. Now, the Justice Department shouldn't exist. The Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department definitely shouldn't exist, because the Civil Rights Division it rests on the foundation of the 14th Amendment and the constitutional inversion that was implemented with the 14th Amendment. So in my mind, all that stuff has to be removed. And to take down the Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department would suggest movement in that direction. And again, I think that there are a bunch of things that suggest movement in that direction. Also of note, Harmeet Dillon was the person Trump assigned to head the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department. Harmeet Dillon has brought cases on behalf of Donald Trump and aligned interests in the past. She also seemed to be a serious DeSantis simp and tried to change California Republican primary rules to make it so that the primary in California, where supposedly Trump and DeSantis would split some amount of votes, those delegates would then also split, allowing someone other than Trump to gain significant ground in California while not winning. And it was a pretty blatant attempt, and she was called out pretty roundly for it. So we will see. She was one of those people that during the DeSantis simp op, when I would be interacting with what I could tell were definitely bot swarms, Harmeet Dillon would be following all of them, as would Thomas Massey, as would Chip Roy, and as would many of the DeSantis simps. So were they sock accounts, bot accounts, troll armies like NAFO, etc.? Could have been all the above. And the question is, were people like this targeting those ops, pointing out which statements were damaging? Conspiracy theory? Yes. But it's one that it's a conclusion, or a theory, I should say, that I reached having interacted with all of that for months and months and months, thousands and thousands and thousands of iterations. You pick up the patterns. And I think if anybody witnessed me doing that from the end of 2022 through the end of 2023, you'll know exactly what I was talking about. And to think that I'm off base saying any of this would be a little crazy. So back to the article. The new ruling from the 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals covers the 7 Midwestern states covered in the St. Louis-based district. The opinion means that in those states, only the Justice Department can bring lawsuits enforcing a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, which was passed by Congress, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it's supposed to address racial discrimination in election policies. The 2-1 ruling from the 8th Circuit said that a separate civil rights law known as Section 1983 did not give private individuals the right to bring VRA cases. That question had been left unanswered in a previous ruling from the circuit that said the VRA itself conferred no private right of action. Those rulings cut against decades of cases successfully brought by individual voters to challenge election policies that violate the VRA by discriminating based on race. Several of the cases traveled up to the Supreme Court and produced rulings affirming the lower court decisions in the voters' favor, supporting the long-term understanding that the VRA gave private individuals ability to enforce the law with lawsuits. So, the issue at stake here is the Voting Rights Act is a federal law. The U.S. Attorney General enforces violations of federal law. That's the job. That's the way the system makes sense. What the situation was prior to this, and we will see how it ultimately shakes out, all this stuff, no matter if we get a good decision or a bad decision, it's all eventually going to go to the Supreme Court so that the constitutional issues can be worked out. And then once it's there, and as we'll discuss throughout the coverage of the arguments yesterday on birthright citizenship, we are at the point where the Supreme Court is being tested for its own legitimacy against the Trump administration and against MAGA and against the American people. Okay? It's no longer that the Supreme Court is testing the legitimacy of actions by the White House or by anyone else. or even rendering important binding opinions on the Constitution. If they continue, if the Supreme Court validates what these lower courts are doing, almost always on the basis of 14th Amendment jurisprudence, which means all the laws that have, beyond just the jurisprudence, all the laws that are founded on the 14th Amendment, the legal precedent on the 14th Amendment, all the statutes and regulations and rules that have been allowed because of the 14th Amendment and the commitment to equal treatment that it prescribes, all that stuff could go away. If the court sides with all of that against the Trump administration repeatedly, then the court is going to lose legitimacy. Trump is not going to be seen as a dictator for wanting to remove criminal alien gang members. There's no point at which that's going to work. Okay? We've watched the directionality of these narratives now for 10 years. The idea that it's going to turn around and that the people are all of a sudden going to go against Trump while he's doing what they elected him to do, quote unquote elected, what the mandate suggests he is there to do, what the people approve of. The idea that the Supreme Court is going to stand in the way of that over and over and over and over and over again for the next 4 years and still retain its legitimacy, well, that's crazy. That's impossible to believe. And my friend Patel Patriot and Burning Bright, they both had a great discussion on this the other night on Devolution Power Hour. And what I just said about the court's own legitimacy being tested throughout this process is the only thing that I would add to their discussion of the other night. They also went through the Declaration of Independence and the famous quote about the long trail of usurpations. And so I just am trying to pull that up here so that we can, so that I get the wording exactly right. Okay. Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, "Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and provide new guards for their future security." All right. And we are in that stage. We are well into that stage. We are deep into that stage. And so if the courts continue to make decisions that go against the Trump administration and the obvious and overwhelming mandate of the people, the courts are going to lose their legitimacy. So in this decision here, the idea is that individuals were able to sue according to this federal law, even though the Attorney General wasn't enforcing violations of it. And so it's a matter of whether or not individual citizens can say, this voting rule in this state that this state has set up is racist. It's discriminating, and therefore it violates the Voting Rights Act. And therefore, now you can strike down this rule, you being the courts in this situation. You can see how that policy might be a real problem. And it's a very similar issue to the one that was discussed primarily in the birthright citizenship arguments yesterday, which, truth be told, were not really about at all birthright citizenship. They were about whether or not the practice of district courts giving national injunctions was a correct and proper practice. And I listened to the duration of those arguments, and we're going to present some of that in a second, but similar ideas here. Can you create a lawfare apparatus that spans the country? Can you infiltrate the courts and put friendly communist judges in courts all over the country? And if you do that, can you then hand select quote unquote victims or those people who have been harmed in some way by these policies, make them plaintiffs in the cases, fund those cases via NGOs, and then have these white shoe DC law firms go argue those cases through the lower court system and get election laws that are unfavorable to the regime stricken. That's the way things work. Okay. And that's the same situation we have when we're talking about national injunctions. They can shop around the country, find the proper court, the venue, and juries, but that's a different kind of thing, unfortunately. And select the plaintiffs because they have the money, they have the attorneys, they know what arguments are going to work in what places. And so then it's just a matter of finding plaintiffs. So this seems like a small thing, but this is a major part of the lawfare apparatus. If they can't bring these cases on behalf of individuals, and enforcement of these federal laws requires action by the U.S. Attorney General or one of the deputies or whatever, the U.S. attorneys, etc., then that changes the game. Let us continue to the Supreme Court cases themselves. And before it all got going yesterday, Donald Trump put out a couple of posts on Truth Social early in the morning. This is a long one, but I think it's worth going through. Big case today in the United States Supreme Court. Birthright citizenship was not meant for people taking vacations to become permanent citizens of the United States of America and bringing their families with them. All the time laughing at the quote unquote suckers that we are. The United States of America is the only country in the world that does this. For what reason, nobody knows. But the drug cartels love it. We are, for the sake of being politically correct, a stupid country. But in actuality, this is the exact opposite of being politically incorrect. And it is yet another point that leads to the dysfunction of America. Birthright citizenship is about the babies of slaves. As conclusive proof, the Civil War ended in 1865. The bill went to Congress less than a year later, in 1866, and was passed shortly after that. It had nothing to do with illegal immigration for people wanting to scam our country from all parts of the world, which they have done for many years. It had to do with Civil War results and the babies of slaves who our politicians felt correctly needed protection. Please explain this to the Supreme Court of the United States. Again, remember, the Civil War ended in 1865, and the bill goes to Congress in 1866. We didn't have people pouring into our country from all over South America and the rest of the world. It wasn't even a subject. What we had were the babies of slaves. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Good luck with this very important case. God bless the USA. He then went on to post another short post and said, remember, it all started after the Civil War ended. It had nothing to do with current day immigration policy. And that is true. So beyond what Trump just said, there were other arguments at stake in that case. And again, it didn't really involve birthright citizenship and the merits of birthright citizenship at all. In fact, it was the administration's own argument, and John Sauer, the U.S. Solicitor General that argued the case on behalf of the Trump administration. It was their own argument that they did not want to engage the merits of that case because primarily the issue that they had to decide first was whether or not national injunctions can be brought in the first place. And so that's where the arguments were. Now, as for the birthright citizenship part, there's something really interesting about this. And I wish I knew the Civil War history of this particular issue better, but I was listening to the arguments on my drive, and so I didn't have the opportunity to go back and look through some of that history to the extent that I would be able to find it in the first place. But so the Solicitor General argues the government's point of view, and then that person's time is done, and then once all the questions are answered that the Supreme Court justices will be asking. I don't think it's about time, and I don't mean to imply that, although it might be. I don't think it is, but it might be. then the opposition party, I guess that's not obviously what they're called, but in this case, they would have been, I don't know, plaintiffs, but they're arguing on behalf of some plaintiffs and plaintiff states. Okay. And so the attorney on that side was named like John Fagenbaum or something. And he sounded like any liberal you could possibly imagine. Oh, is he going to sound like a whiny little bitch? Is he going to sound like a gay man? Yes. And I'm not saying all gay men sound like whiny little bitches. Don't anybody get upset out there. I wouldn't want to hear you start whining. But he actually, the one interesting part of his argument, which was mostly just regime-oriented nonsense about how you can't do this and you can't do that because we have these needs and it's going to cause these problems. And, you know, you can't do things that are going to cause these many problems. You know, the states have an interest because they're going to have to spend money and they're going to have to spend time figuring out these citizenship issues. And you can't make the states do that. And therefore, you have to violate the Constitution, which is what their arguments always are. They have some practical notion, some practical concern that is supposed to override everything. That ain't how it's supposed to work. The Supreme Court is supposed to decide matters of constitutionality. If something is unconstitutional and the states have done something that violates that, or even the federal government itself is doing things that violate the Constitution, well, you favor the Constitution. That's the point of the Supreme Court. The interesting issue of note, though, is if you don't have citizenship at birth and a policy about citizenship was left to the states, if you go from one state to the other, will your citizenship transfer? I don't know how this used to be back then before we were under this constitutional inversion and before the states were even considered states of this, you know, union, and however you want to interpret that. You know, there's the interpretation before and there's the interpretation now. But when all the states were actually separate nations, they were their own nation states, and they came together in a union for their common good and common defense, and to, I guess, refine issues of trade and currency and the rest. How was it then? If you were a citizen of Virginia, you would not also then be a citizen of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, right? I think that's how it used to work. And so there are different issues that would not be, and that would be an entirely different condition than we find ourselves in now, the one we've been accustomed to understand as our citizenship. Just we're a citizen of the United States of America, and that applies in any of the 50 states. That's just, we're all Americans, and then we just live in one of these different states that used to be considered their own nations with their own cultures and their own laws. Let me see if Steve Claybaugh is still here. Oh, he just said yes, exactly. Well, I hope he's responding to me and not the people in the chat, but he might be responding to the people in the chat. Polymathanon says he can ignore it just like Jefferson did when they passed the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798. It became moot by not enforcing them. This is where today's case ultimately lies. And yes, I would agree. The enforcement needs to stop. And if the government stops, the courts have no enforcement mechanism. We're about to get into this, but one of the things I think to pay attention to, one of the real takeaways that I had from listening to these arguments in particular, was that the court was absolutely desperate to preserve its own power. And every argument was framed within the protection of that power. And it came from both sides. It wasn't only Kagan, Sotomayor, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, though they were primarily focused on these sorts of things. It was also Amy Coney Barrett, Justice Kavanaugh, and to a large degree, Justice Gorsuch. I only heard John Roberts ask one question to Feigenbaum. I suppose I could have missed it being his voice. But one of the funniest things about the Supreme Court is that when you're listening to one of these arguments, because they don't have video, the amazing thing is that you can tell who's speaking just by knowing what they look like. It's the craziest thing. I don't think that this would apply in all walks of life, of course. But Justice Thomas sounds like Justice Thomas. Sounds like a 70-year-old black man. Justice Sotomayor sounds like the Mexican maid from Family Guy. Justice Amy Coney Barrett sounds like a very well-to-do white woman. Justice Kavanaugh sounds like maybe he's from the Midwest or something. Gorsuch sounds exactly like he looks. Who else do we have? Ketanji Brown Jackson sounds like a black woman. Elena Kagan sounds like Elena Kagan would sound. And yeah, I don't know. It's incredible, though. You can listen and be like, ah, yeah, that's Gorsuch. Oh, yeah, that's Thomas. Oh, yeah, that's Sotomayor. It's amazing. Doesn't happen always, but it happens there. Before we get into it, OpTZ in the chat, $5. I love how Trump wanted to say retarded, but said stupid to be politically correct. Yes, he could have been saying that. Apparently, by the way, Greg Gutfeld, in addition to this,
Anna Paulina Luna. All right.
started talking about Planet Retard the other night. I guess now it's cool on Fox News. You're welcome, world. Also, Rumble Rant from Steve Claybaugh. Yes, you are correct. Well, thank you very much, my friend. Thank you very much. I'm glad that I properly represented those constitutional issues, because the problem is when you get into that territory, not having, and most of the territory in general that I work with, is that I know that the things I say are not going to be backed up by authoritative sources. The authoritative sources are specifically designed never to agree with the things that I say. So if you are in the normie sphere and you are not accustomed to hearing conversations like this, you're going to immediately reject all that. You'll go look it up, and all the authoritative sources will say, "No, that guy's wrong." Okay? I understand that. That makes it very hard for me to do my job. It means I have to do a lot more research and argue only and constantly from first principles, which again is the sort of thing that never happens when your whole thing is analyzing those who are, playing match online. Oh, look, I found a match. Oh, let me tell you what it means. Oh, it doesn't mean that. 6 years later, I'll tell you it means something else. Okay. But when you don't have the authoritative sources to rely on, it becomes a much different thing. And it's one of the reasons that things are more inaccessible. Should also be noted, though, when you are listening to the things I say, if something I say sounds like it's totally off, first of all, it might be. I don't know everything, okay? I have my opinions. I have my best understanding. I try to communicate everything through that lens and tell you what lens I'm communicating through, okay? And that's all I can do. That's the most honest, open thing I can do, okay? I'm not going to have other people's opinions. I'm not trying to repeat other people's opinions, which for the most part right now, I don't listen to anyone's opinions. I don't listen to any show but Bannon every now and then, and 10th Amendment Center every now and then I consume the news as it comes in, and that's it. But if you want to check out the things I say, rather than attempting to debunk, and this is something that normies need to understand, and it might help in your conversation with normies if you relay this understanding, but say, rather than trying to prove me wrong, research ways to prove me right and see if those are compelling to you, and see if those sources are ones you believe you can trust. See if the sources point in the direction of what I'm saying or the direction of what the regime is saying. So the idea of debunking things that people like me say, or that people broadly on our side say, that's how things have been done for a really long time, which means nobody ever makes any progress. If you're actually trying to learn, rather than just disproving someone on the other side, attempt to do the research that would prove them right. And if you find that there's a good case to be made that they are right, well, then you better start considering maybe it's time to change my opinion. All right? So with that said, let us keep rolling. But yeah, I mean, I am going to use that strategy more in the future, I think, because man, oh man, people just who've never engaged with any of these issues in any first principles oriented way, have never spent any time thinking about these issues. They're just certain that you're wrong because the news says otherwise. Those are the people who need this technique the most. And now, if they are really adamantly opposed to what you're saying, if they are extremely insecure, which is probably the case because they don't know anything, and they know they don't know anything, they just know that you're wrong. And you definitely don't know anything because they know they don't know anything, but the people on their side are the good ones. So their opinions are represented by the good people who know everything, and therefore you're wrong. Okay. It's just a hate movement at the end of the day. But if they're not Trump deranged and they're not that angry, then just suggest to them, I understand that I'm saying things that you would deem to be wrong. Rather than looking up how I'm wrong, attempt to prove me right and see if there's a case to be made. That, I think, is a better strategy. All right, let me just briefly pause and then we'll get into the business of these Supreme Court cases. Checking in on Substack, checking in on YouTube. Hello over there and other over there. People are starting to pick up in both of those locations, and I appreciate that. That's awesome. So it's not just Rumble anymore. Terry A gifted 5 subscriptions. I wish I still had my subscription bay picture of Salt Bay, just sprinkling subscriptions around. Whatever. It's gone. I threw it in my digital trash can. The digital trash took itself out. But everybody knows what Salt Bay looks like. Just imagine that he was sprinkling subscriptions, and it'll get you all the way there. So let us quickly. I was going to start with this Hill article because I didn't initially think I was going to have a chance to make it through all of the arguments today, but I was able to do that. Let's just take this quickly. This is from the Hill. 5 takeaways from birthright citizenship argument at the Supreme Court. Their highlights were conservatives question the need for universal injunctions. And yes, that's what the case is about. Liberal justices defend nationwide relief. And they had some help. Sorry, Jeremy Feigenbaum was his name. They had some help from some of the so-called conservative justices as well, but they want to be able to maintain the situation where courts that aren't even the Supreme Court have the ability to immediately stop the president from doing anything that a court deems unlawful or unconstitutional. They want to have that relief available at all times. Now, Feigenbaum argued that it should be used rarely, only in certain circumstances, but you got to keep this tool for us. Now, that is totally unprincipled. Either they should have it in all circumstances or none. Either the practice stands on principle relative to the Constitution or it doesn't. You can't determine that, okay, well, you know, in this situation, I do think it's important that this district court be able to, by fiat, constrain the action of the president. That's crazy. That's judicial supremacy and an extreme version of judicial review. So all the courts at this level, as soon as you're in a federal court, they can restrain the president. Okay. They have the option for judicial review, and they have the ability to, quote unquote, enforce these, even though they have no enforcement mechanism whatsoever. They want to retain it in certain cases. It's important, so they have to argue that they need it. So we're already into the world of practical concerns. And then again, they argue in the world of practical concerns, we have a practical concern about this particular case that is so important on whatever subjective basis they make that argument, that in this particular case, then we need to violate the constitutional principle. It's almost an admission that it is unprincipled, that it should not happen. But they're saying, well, we need it in these certain situations. Otherwise, the states are going to be negatively affected. How are the states going to be negatively affected? They are going to be negatively affected because of their record keeping and the distribution of state benefits. And the people will be affected because those illegal aliens who would be having the children that would then have birthright citizenship, they would not be allowed to access state benefits. And so that's the harm that comes to them. Both of those things are absolutely crazy. The state shouldn't be involved in any of the stuff the state's involved with in the first place, in terms of the welfare and all the rest of it. The state shouldn't be involved. But to the extent they are, now the argument becomes these people are going to be harmed by their inability to access state benefits. The illegal aliens will be harmed by their inability to access state benefits on behalf of their child who now has birthright citizenship. I don't know who you're going to be able to sell that idea to, other than the most liberal people in the world who understand that good people believe this way. And that really is all there is to it for them. I mean, I used to be one. I know them. I tried to justify my virtue signaling with more elaborate arguments by learning the totality of the official story on all of these issues and all the arguments to know the full extent of the argument that went in my favor. And then I would argue that because I knew what side I had to come down on. It's very motivated thinking. It's not critical thinking. It's not intelligent thinking. It's motivated thinking. Okay. And so that's what we're dealing with in this situation in particular. But I cannot imagine that if this issue was taken out to the country and presented by someone like Donald Trump or someone like Stephen Miller, which is what he's doing, hammering it on television for a duration, that the country at large would side with this position on birthright citizenship and the states being harmed because they were going to have to do more work to figure out who was a citizen and who wasn't and divide these things up. And the illegal aliens would be harmed by their inability to access benefits. That's a pretty elaborate way to get to, we need to violate constitutional principle. Bay Theater Dave says, a liberal Chris sounds scary. One of the funniest things that I heard just to pause on a tangent for a second. One of the funniest things that I heard in my time in Hollywood in 2020, after I had, donned a Keep America Great hat and come out loudly and proudly, not only against the entire very deadly pandemic narrative, which was obviously bullshit, but the Summer of Love narrative celebrating George Floyd Day. We're going to have George Floyd Day in 2 weeks. There's talk now, by the way, that that President Trump might pardon Derek Chauvin or whatever they call him, who was convicted, quote unquote, of murder in that fake trial with the fake jury about the fake murder, all that. So there's going to be a pardon, and then there's going to be a riot movement that's going to coincide with George Floyd's day. Isn't that amazing just how the timing works? It's like it was set up or something. So I don't know. There's some discussion to be had about whether there's any indication that Trump would try to do a pardon. I don't see why they would do that unless he wanted to press that issue. Okay, that doesn't seem like the right way to handle that case, but I guess we'll see. So anyway, one of the things in 2020 that I thought was hilarious was that my liberal friends, who were still incredibly Trump deranged and incredibly liberal, but not as hostile as others, were like, man, you would be such an asset to our side. All right, commie, but I'm not on your side. I used to be on your side. And then I realized, hey, this side's all full of communists and atheists and nihilists and scientific materialists and people who do not make moral decisions and cannot even think their way through these issues. So I'm sorry, but I can no longer be on your side. Let us go back to the Hill. A who's who at the high court. All right. Well, we don't really need to think too much about this. Let's skip down. This part's interesting, though, just because of these names. The 14th Amendment establishes who we are. This is the soul of our country, he said. And this is Connecticut Attorney General William Tong. I guess this was earlier in the arguments. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche and Emil Bove, another high-ranking Justice Department official, made a rare appearance and sat in the center section of the public gallery. So those are the people at the DOJ who are not Pam Bondi, who were already running things before Pam Bondi was put in that position. John Eastman, a lawyer at the center of Trump's bid to overturn the 2020 presidential election results and a major proponent of his birthright citizenship arguments, was also at the courthouse. I think the historical record is much stronger in favor of President Trump's executive order than the 3 or 4 justices that commented about the merits were willing to accept. And yes, again, and maybe we'll hear it here. I can't remember if I pulled that clip, but Elena Kagan attempted to move Solicitor General Sauer, to the merits of the case. She wanted to hear the merits argument so that they could then use different methods to get rid of this case. But he moved away from it again and again and again. The rule of law emerges as a key theme. We're going to hear some of that. Okay, so we're going to leave that article alone, and let's hear some of the audio from the case. And again, pay attention and see if you can tell exactly which voice, which justice is speaking at which time. So I'm going to pull these from X, formerly Twitter, and the people posting them are largely irrelevant, so I'm going to skip that part.
Promptly issued nationwide or universal injunctions blocking this order, and a cascade of such universal injunctions followed. Since January 20th, district courts have now issued 40 universal injunctions against the federal government, including 35 from the same 5 judicial districts. This is a bipartisan problem that has now spanned the last 5 presidential administrations. Universal injunctions exceed the judicial power granted in Article 3, which exists only to address the injury to the complaining party. They transgress the traditional bounds of equitable authority, and they create a host of practical problems. Such injunctions prevent the percolation of novel and difficult legal questions. They encourage rampant forum shopping. They require judges to make rushed, high-stakes, low-information decisions. They circumvent Rule 23 by offering all the benefits but none of the burdens of class certification. They operate asymmetrically, forcing the government to win everywhere while the plaintiffs can win anywhere. They invert the ordinary hierarchy of appellate review. They create the ongoing risk of conflicting judgments. They increase the pressures on this court's emergency docket. They create what Justice Powell described as repeated and essentially head-on confrontations between the life-tenured and representative branches of government. And they disrupt the Constitution's careful balancing of the separation of powers. I welcome the court's questions.
Now, that is a fantastic opening statement. He laid out like 10 critical arguments there, and the case should be decided on any of those 10 arguments. Because again, on the other side, all they have are practical concerns, and then practical concerns about practical concerns. And then, of course, as I said, the justice's priority to maintain judicial supremacy and judicial review in all cases and at all levels of the court, because that's part of the regime system. And now, should they be jealous of their power? Should they be looking after and protecting their own power? You could make an argument that they should be protecting their power to the extent that the Constitution is not being usurped, that their power under the Constitution, I should say, is not being usurped. That's the amount of protection that they should exercise. But instead, they are protecting prior court precedent that empowers them further. Judicial review in particular, and then just judicial supremacy as kind of a practice, which is less solidified, I suppose, or more debatable. But yeah, judicial review was put in place by Justice John Marshall in Marbury versus Madison in 1803. Okay. So 14 years after the Constitution was ratified, after the Constitution, quote unquote, was ratified, quote unquote. It's all so suspect now, to be honest. But 14 years later, he took an issue that was argued about during the writing of the Constitution and the ratification process, and specifically left out of the Constitution, and then by his own judicial fiat, added it to the Constitution. And we are still dealing with it now, 222 years later. So that's a lot. And they're trying to protect that, and they're trying to protect it at lower court levels as well. He said two things that I want to key in on, and then we can keep moving, because I know that, I could talk about that opening statement for an entire episode. I think it's that interesting. And I think he laid out so many important constitutional issues. One of them that he talked about was the percolation, which means like the rising up through the court system to the Supreme Court, of these novel and critical legal questions. He said novel, and I think he said critical, but he might have said something else. Don't quote me on that. But the idea that there are these legal issues that the Supreme Court never actually ends up hearing arguments on or making decisions on, because they're constantly just ended in the lower courts due to the lower court's ability to impose these nationwide injunctions at will until they're argued all the way up through the Supreme Court. It's reducing the number of those that might get argued up all the way to the Supreme Court, because it's just another barrier in the lawfare system that preserves the system at the very top level. You have to actually be able to argue something all the way through the courts, overriding all the precedent and everything else at each level, or being able to successfully appeal to the next level and be able to get that all the way up to the Supreme Court. And so the ability to do that is being limited. The barriers are being imposed by the district court's ability to submit these nationwide injunctions. He also says that it requires the government to win everywhere, while it requires the plaintiffs to win anywhere. Okay. So if they have a lawfare network that covers the entirety of the United States, they can bring cases left and right with NGO funding, which is regime funding, and they print the money. Those cases can be brought anywhere on a whole variety of different legal issues. And if any of those cases work, the president is immediately thwarted. If any of those cases work in any of those courts that they also have some measure of control over, the president's ability to act is thwarted. Whereas the government then has the responsibility to defend the president's actions in each one of those venues. And they have to win everywhere, because if they lose anywhere, then the president's action is thwarted. That is alone reason to strike this down. And I think, again, all of those arguments are reason to strike this down. And I really think that particular opening statement is well worth everybody's time. I'm going to actually throw that in the chat, and I'm going to post it up on Telegram. Solicitor General Sowers opening statements. Sorry. I know that saying these words as I type them out is not remotely interesting for the audio listeners. And I do apologize, but you can now go to t.me/veryreasonable on Telegram and get that opening statement. And I would encourage listening to it. If this is the sort of thing you're into, listening to it a few times, taking each one of those arguments that he lists in a row. He lists like 10 different arguments in a row. Each one of those arguments, and thinking about and looking into each one of those arguments. Very, very interesting stuff. All right. So some of these might be a bit out of order, unfortunately, but we're just going to take them in the order as best I could compile them. And let us go here.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. The original meaning of the citizenship clause extended citizenship to the children of former slaves, not to people who are unlawfully or temporarily present in the United States. The merits arguments we are presenting to the lower courts are compelling. We cite, for example, a host of 19th century authorities that point out that domicile was the touchstone of non-citizens being treated as, having their offspring treated as citizens in that context. That is consistent with Wong Kim Ark, as well as with the slaughterhouse cases in Elk against Wilkins, and the suggestion that our position on the merits is weak is profoundly mistaken. And that kind of snap judgment on the merits that was presented in the lower courts is exactly the problem with the issue of racing to issue these nationwide injunctions. The Chief Justice correctly pointed out that this court, if it wishes to address the merits expeditiously, has many tools to do so. Cert before judgment is one possible tool. There are also others. But this court should also address the scope of remedy, the remedial question that's presented in the application. That is an extremely urgent question. And one of the reasons it's an extremely urgent question is the limiting principles that my friends on the other side have been offering have all proven to be completely ineffective to slowing the essentially flood or cascade of universal injunctions that we see in these cases. The states here have a unique issue that hasn't come up yet, but for the reasons we state in our application, they lack third-party standing very clearly under cases like Murphy and Hayland and Katzenbach and Kowalski. So no injunctive relief should run to the states in this particular case anyway. And most fundamentally, the vision of the district courts that's reflected in the issuance of these nationwide injunctions is a vision of them as a roving commission to correct every legal wrong that they can consider and to exercise general legal oversight over the executive branch, which is what this court rejected in TransUnion. And for those reasons, we ask the court to grant the applications. Thank you.
A roving commission. And that is what they act like. They have the ability all around the country to find these cases and then give their final say on what the government's allowed to do. That's a big deal. The issue with the states there, he cites Murphy, which is that case from last year about the censorship issues. They dismissed that on standing at the Supreme Court last year. A lot of people got really upset about that. But now Sauer is using their position on standing last year to say that the states don't have standing to bring this case in the first place. So that part of the case already, the state's arguments in that case have to be ignored and put aside. That'll be an interesting issue for them to sort out. I mean, they're the ones who came up with Murphy. So let us continue. Here is, and by the way, I guess that was John Roberts asking a question to Solicitor General Sauer. I was driving when I heard that, and I guess that I got the name and face part of it wrong, or the voice and face part of it wrong. So here is Sauer with Kagan.
Justice Kagan?
So, General, on this question of expedition, I mean, it sort of depends on the government's own actions in a case like this one, where one can expect that there is not going to be a great deal of disagreement among the lower courts. I mean, let's assume that you lose in the lower courts pretty uniformly, as you have been losing on this issue, and that you never take this question to us. I mean, I noticed that you didn't take the substantive question to us. You only took the nationwide injunction question to us. I mean, why would you take the substantive question to us? You're losing a bunch of cases, this guy over here, this woman over here, you know, they'll have to be treated as citizens, but nobody else will. Why would you ever take this case to us?
Well, in this particular case, we have deliberately not presented the merits to this court on the question of the scope of remedies, because of course that makes it a clean vehicle where the court doesn't have to look at the past.
You're ignoring the import of my question. I'm suggesting that in a case in which the government is losing constantly, there's nobody else who's going to appeal, they're winning. It's up to you to decide whether to take this case to us. If I were in your shoes, there is no way I'd approach the Supreme Court with this case. So you just keep on losing in the lower courts, and what's supposed to happen to prevent that?
Again, I respectfully disagree with that forecast of the merits, but in response to the question, what I would say is we have an adversarial system, and if the government is not, for example, not respecting circuit precedent on the court's hypothetical in the Second Circuit, someone injured in the Second Circuit could take the case up, and they could say, look, the government is violating circuit precedent on the hypothetical multiple circuits.
That's the case we're going to take? Somebody who says, you know, after we've said that this all has to be done one by one, then we're going to take a case from somebody who objects to proceeding one by one?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I understand the hypothetical.
If you win this challenge and say there is no nationwide injunction and it all has to be through individual cases, then I can't see how an individual who is not, being treated equivalently to the individual who brought the case would have any ability to bring the substantive question to us.
They would bring a lawsuit in the federal district courts against the government for an injunction protecting them. And if the government wasn't respecting, on the
and then they win. And again, you need somebody to lose, but nobody's going to lose in this case. It's just you're going to have individual by individual by individual, and all of those individuals are going to win. And the ones who can't afford to go to court, they're the ones who are going to lose.
The tools that are provided to address hypotheticals like this, again,
this is not a hypothetical. This is happening out there, right? Every court has ruled against you.
We've only had snap judgments on the merits. Obviously, we're fully briefing the merits in the courts of appeals, and our arguments are compelling. More fundamentally, in response to the question,
I'm suggesting to you, the real brunt of my question is, in a case like this, the government has no incentive to bring this case to the Supreme Court because it's not really losing anything. It's losing a lot of individual cases, which still allow it to enforce its EO against the vast majority of people to whom it applies.
And again, Rule 23 provides an avenue to address those very concerns.
Thank you.
And so that was one of the big arguments throughout the entire 2 hours plus of the arguments from both sides, whether or not the class action would be an appropriate way to provide relief for more than just a single individual, so that in an instance where many individuals around the country are affected by something, they wouldn't then have to each bring their own case against the government in order to have this kind of one-to-one personal relief. He suggested the class action method as a way to do that. And so then they obviously tried to maneuver around that. And you can hear some of the maneuvering from Kagan right there. So let's say the government is wrong in a certain situation. They have chosen to do something unlawful. Okay. If you sue the government and you win because the government was doing something unlawful and it only affects you, well, then everybody else who that unlawful activity affects will not be helped by your decision. They would all have to file their own lawsuits and win those lawsuits, et cetera. And so that's kind of what she's making as the point. But Clarence Thomas, as he often does, gets it in the most simple fashion.
Injunctions used.
We believe that the best reading of that is what you said in Trump against Hawaii, which is that Wirtz in 1963 was really the first universal injunction. There's a dispute about Perkins against Lucan's Oil going back to 1940. And of course, we point to the court's opinion that reversed that universal injunction issued by the DC Circuit and said it's profoundly wrong. Now, if you look at the cases that the either party cite, you see a common theme. The cases that we cite, like National Treasury's Employment Union, Perkins against Lucan's Oil, Frothingham in Massachusetts against Mellon, going back to Scott against Donald, and all of those are cases where the court considered and addressed the sort of universal, in that case, statewide issue of provision of injunctive relief. So when the court has considered and addressed this, it has consistently said you have to limit the remedy to the plaintiffs who appearing in court and complaining of that remedy.
So we survived until the 1960s without universal injunctions.
That's exactly correct. And in fact, those are very limited, very rare, even in the 1960s. It really exploded in 2007 in our cert petition in Summers against Earth Island Institute. We pointed out that the Ninth Circuit had started doing this in a whole bunch of cases involving environmental claims.
Justice Alito?
So somehow we survived as a nation until 1960 without nationwide injunctions, and it kept going like that. They were rarely used until 2007. And all of a sudden now there's been 40 of them already during the Trump administration. Here is Ketanji Brown Jackson making no bones about why they need to keep things as they are.
I would think we'd want the system to move as quickly as possible to reach the merits of the issue and maybe have this court decide whether or not the government is entitled to do this under the law. Wouldn't having universal injunctions actually facilitate that? It seems to me that when the government is completely enjoined from doing the thing it wants to do, it moves quickly to appeal that, to get it to the Supreme Court. And that's actually what we would want. What I worry about is similar to what Justice Kagan points out, is that if the government is saying no lower court can completely enjoin it, it actually means that the government just keeps on doing the purportedly unlawful thing, and it delays the ability for this court to reach the underlying issue. I would think we'd want the system.
All right. So, I mean, it's not like it's an entirely invalid issue, but they want to be able to have power over the government to stop the government from doing things. Many of us were taught that that's actually what the role of the court is. So the question is, how do we remedy a situation where a president is going to overstep constitutional authority and do something unlawful? You can imagine numerous scenarios, and Kagan kept trying to bring up over and over again, what if the president ordered the military to go take everybody's guns? Would each gun owner have to sue individually in order to be protected from that? Well, if the president did that and actually wanted to do it, people suing isn't going to stop the president from doing it. Okay. Like if you were going to already enforce that and take people's guns at gunpoint, then you're already in the phase of state violence against the people, essentially. You know, the people, again, have the ultimate mandate. They're the ultimate authority that gives the government legitimacy and the president legitimacy. And so that, I think, would be the final authority ultimately. If the president does something in violation of the Constitution, well, then, I mean, I guess the Congress can try to pass laws and stop that. But at some point, the people actually have to be the final authority, as they are, and make it quite clear that the federal government, the president, doesn't have the authority to do those things. That's where it ultimately needs to come from, I guess. I guess that part of it is a thornier issue, and the constitutionalists in the chat, I'd be happy to read your thoughts on that in particular. But let us keep marching forward. Another issue, as we discussed before, is the one of what you might call forum or venue shopping. Here we are.
Cascade of such universal injunctions followed. Since January 20th, district courts have now issued 40 universal injunctions against the federal government, including 35 from the same 5 judicial districts. This is a bipartisan problem that has now spanned the last 5 presidential administrations. Universal injunctions exceed the judicial power granted in Article 3, which exists only to address the injury to the complaining party. They transgress the traditional bounds of equitable authority, and they create a host of practical problems. Such injunctions prevent the percolation of novel and difficult legal questions. They encourage rampant forum shopping. They require judges to make rushed.
Darn it. That was just the opening statement again. I apologize for that. I thought I had something particularly centered around forum shopping. I must have just put the same thing in there twice under 2 different labels. Forgive me. Okay, so this is one of the really interesting moments, very subtle moment. Listen to what Elena Kagan says here. This is just going to be a super short clip, but what she says here is unbelievable.
Be like an untold number of people who, according to all the law that this court has ever made, ought to be citizens who are not being treated.
All the law that this court has ever made. And they brought up 4 past cases. You heard one of them, Wong Kim Ark, and some other cases from the past that deal with issues about the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. She's saying all the law this court has ever made suggests that you would lose this case on the merits. And then, of course, all these people would be affected based on the law that they have made. And now all that law would be overturned. That's what you're asking the court to do, is overturn all the law this court has made. Now, I mean, you can say it's a slip of the tongue or something, but it didn't sound like one. It sounds like Elena Kagan believes that the court has ruled what is law, that they made law. They've said, well, this is how the policy must be handled. And now that we've said that, that's what the law says. That's what the law is. That's not their job. I think it's incredible that she even said that as a slip of the tongue. Terry A, $10 in the chat. The 7 judges, sleepy, grumpy, dopey, angry, snooty, creepy, assholey. How do Thomas and Alito stomach this shit show? Yeah, I agree with you. I read Neil Gorsuch's book. I think he has some good points in that book. It's very much a book geared toward normies and seems to be written by a normie. I'm not saying he's a bad man. Not saying he's not honest. Saying he's indoctrinated into the same system, and there's no balls anywhere here to go beyond that and actually adhere to the Constitution. And so, yeah, I find him and Kavanaugh and obviously John Roberts to be, and of course, Amy Coney Barrett to be disappointing. Now, we're going to see how it all shakes out in the long run. You know, the game's not over. You just wait and see. It's not like we can affect this and change or control what they're doing. So we really are, unfortunately, stuck in a wait and see. But at the end of this period, you know, the next period begins and we decide how to proceed in the future. Now, one of the other issues about this, Sauer had an exchange with Kagan, and then he has this exchange with Coney Barrett. I think I have the Coney Barrett one here pulled up, but about whether or not it's the government's policy, this government's policy, to adhere to court opinion and precedent.
Okay, so I'm not talking about a situation in which, you know, the Second Circuit has a case from 1955.
And by the way, you can tell that sounds like Amy Coney Barrett, and it is Amy Coney Barrett.
And you think it's time for it to be challenged. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in this kind of situation. I'm talking about this week, the Second Circuit holds that the executive order is unconstitutional. And then what do you do the next day or the next week?
Generally, we follow.
So you're still saying generally?
Yes.
And you still think that it's generally the policy, longstanding policy of the federal government to take that approach?
That is my understanding.
Okay, so, but it sounds to me like you accept a Cooper versus Aaron kind of situation for the Supreme Court, but not for, say, the Second Circuit. Like where you would respect the opinions and the judgments of the Supreme Court, and you're saying you would respect the judgment, but not necessarily the opinion of a lower court.
And again, I think in the vast majority of instances, our practice has been to respect the opinion as well, in the circuits as well. But my understanding is that has not been a categorical practice in the way respect for the precedents and the judgments of the Supreme Court has been.
So you're not hedging at all with respect to the precedent of this court?
That is correct. I believe the quotation from our application directly addresses that, and we stand by that completely.
Now, I mean, if you're me, you want him to go all in on, yeah, you can't actually enforce any of this stuff. And even Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 78 said that the courts were not designed with an enforcement mechanism. Your job is to opine on these things, and that is it. And the president is under no requirement whatsoever to ignore his national security concerns because you like to have final say on everything. Now, we're not going to get, I don't think, anytime soon, a Solicitor General saying anything like that. Interesting arguments, though. I don't always have time to listen to Supreme Court arguments, but, you know, it's ostensibly at least all about constitutional issues. So for me, as someone with some interest in the law and the Constitution and the rest of it, I find them rather enjoyable to listen to, although incredibly frustrating because, again, most of these people are on another planet as far as I'm concerned. And they would say the same thing about me. Oh, well, you don't have any respect for our system. Oh, let me tell you about how the laws came to be. No. Let me tell you about how none of the rules, regulations, statutes, or court precedent are the Constitution. And the 14th Amendment is not the Constitution. The 14th Amendment itself is an inversion of the Constitution that does not adhere to the Constitution. Because it does not adhere to the Constitution, in the same case that gave you your precious judicial review, anything that is repugnant to the Constitution is void. Okay? So the 14th Amendment is void. So let me tell you about how all your rules, regulations, statutes, and court precedent are bullshit and themselves null and void. That's where it has to go eventually. So this is the decision that we saw just earlier on CNN's front page, and we took a peek at that. And let me see here. Just a very short review of what happened today in the courts. Supreme Court blocks Trump from restarting Alien Enemies Act deportations. Now, the headline is already overboard. But as you'll see, Trump also goes overboard. The Supreme Court on Friday blocked President Donald Trump from moving forward with deportations under the 1798 Alien Enemies Act for a group of immigrants in northern Texas, siding with Venezuelans who feared they were poised for imminent removal under the sweeping wartime authority. The decision is a significant loss for Trump, who wants to use the law to speed deportations and avoid the kind of review normally required before removing people from the country. But the decision is also temporary, and the underlying legal fight over the president's invocation has continued simultaneously in multiple federal courts across the country. The justices sent the case back to an appeals court to decide the underlying questions in the case, including whether the president's move is legal, and if it is, how much notice the migrants targeted under the act should receive. And so again, the courts then would just be deciding totally subjectively and arbitrarily, oh, you know what? They need this much time. And of course, Thomas and Alito dissented. And I mean, we're talking about Kagan and Sotomayor, who were nominated by Obama, who legally should have never been president and, didn't win an election, of course. And then Ketanji Brown Jackson, who was nominated by Joe Biden, who can, I guess, legally be president. It just turns out that he wasn't president and was never elected. So get them off there right away. And man, I don't know. The court starts looking a lot different after that. Thomas and Alito, though, are going to carry us through. You can, or at least to the extent that any of them will carry us through, it will be Thomas and Alito, and hence the complete all-out war last year against Thomas and Alito to delegitimize them and delegitimize, in large part, the courts. And I can't say that I am upset about that. Trump reacted to this decision this afternoon in two posts. This is the first one. The Supreme Court won't allow us to get criminals out of our country. Short and sweet. And then we get not so short and sweet. The Supreme Court has just ruled that the worst murderers, drug dealers, gang members, and even those who are mentally insane who came into our country illegally are not allowed to be forced out without going through a long, protracted, and expensive legal process, one that will take possibly many years for each person, and one that will allow these people to commit many crimes before they even see the inside of a courthouse. The result of this decision will let more criminals pour into our country, doing great harm to our cherished American republic. It will also encourage other criminals to illegally enter our country, wreaking havoc and bedlam wherever they go. The Supreme Court of the United States is not allowing me to do what I was elected to do. Sleepy Joe Biden allowed millions of criminal aliens to come into our country without any quote unquote process. But in order to get them out of our country, we have to go through a long and extended process. In any event, thank you to Justice Alito and Justice Thomas for attempting to protect our country. This is a bad and dangerous day for America. That is the President of the United States of America declaring in an official venue, which the courts decided Twitter was a couple of years ago, back in the first term. That is the President of the United States declaring that the Supreme Court will not allow him to do what he was elected by the people to do. That's an extraordinary statement. Now, it's packed inside a Trump Truth Social post, and we are conditioned to thinking social media is just social media, and that Trump is often a lot of bluster, sometimes narrative manipulation and steering things in certain directions. But at the end of the day, he's still the president, and I mean, ultimately, maybe the king of the world. So it does actually matter that he's calling the court out directly now. The court is making it impossible for the president to do what he was elected to do. Ultimately, the people's mandate is what plays. And if we need to get to that point, I don't think we will, but if we need to get to that point, that's all that will and can play. And if it doesn't play at that point, then they should admit at least that we are not a democracy. And they should admit that they don't care what the people think. Because that's really where we are, right? If you don't care what the people think, then you're not a democracy. That's the most obvious thing in the world. And you can tell that they don't care what the people think, because if they cared what the people think, there wouldn't be censorship, there wouldn't be propaganda, and there wouldn't be fake elections. It's as simple as can be. Okay, so let's get into, I have to set a note. Okay, hold for processing. Apologies for that hold. Let us go to geopolitics. And look at this. We're crushing it exactly on the 2-hour mark when we move in to the geopolitical home stretch. And then it's just going to be a party from there on out. I mean, the party part is once we get to Trump's trip to the Middle East, because, man, if you thought the other day was impressive, and it certainly was, and it may have been the most impressive of these days, but it continued being almost just as impressive for the next 2 days. So we're going to go through some of that in a second. But first, right now, Badlands Media from today, Ukraine and Russia agree to largest prisoner swap in first direct peace talks since the war began. Ukrainian and Russian delegations held their first direct peace talks since the start of the war on Friday in Istanbul, reaching an agreement to carry out what would be the largest prisoner exchange of the conflict. The hour and 40-minute meeting, mediated by Turkey, ended with both sides confirming plans to exchange 1,000 prisoners each. Ukraine's defense minister, Rustem Umerov, and Kremlin aide Vladimir Medinsky, who led their respective delegations, confirmed the deal in separate press briefings following the talks. The discussions focused primarily on Ukraine's call for a ceasefire before broader negotiations could proceed. We agreed that each side would present its vision of a possible future ceasefire and would spell it out in detail, Medinsky said, adding that Russia would review Ukraine's request for a meeting between President Vladimir Putin and the comedic actor from Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And obviously, it doesn't say that. More details here on the meeting. Senator Marco Rubio, well, that is Secretary of State Marco Rubio, traveled to Istanbul on Friday and met separately with both delegations before Turkey convened the direct negotiations later in the day. Rubio departed the palace venue ahead of the talks to meet with national security officials from the UK, France, and Germany. And I wonder if the idea about Rubio being senator was from the New York Times article, or if somebody just put that in themselves. Thinking of Rubio's former identity. Now, this is one of the funnier elements from the reporting on this negotiation, these talks in Istanbul. The story has been making rounds that Ukrainians were outraged when Russian negotiators said that Ukrainian soldiers must leave the 4 new Russian regions as part of the ceasefire to which the Moscow delegation replied, next time it will be 5. Now, our reporter in Istanbul got to ask the Russian side how it really went down. And they said, we didn't say 5, we said 8. And of course, it is already 5. It is the 4 regions in the Donbass and Crimea. So that's 5. And then you've got Kherson and what is the other one? I'm blanking on that right now. But they already have like 7 in the mix. So maybe 8 is just Kyiv and then they chop up the rest of the Ukraine, the global regime proxy state, and dish that out to, I don't know, Poland and Belarus and Romania and Moldova, although Moldova is still, I think, regime controlled, so they don't get anything. But we'll see how it's ultimately divided up. Can't imagine there's still going to be the Ukraine at the end of this. And if there is, it's going to be real small. But I think we're kind of working toward getting rid of the entire thing. And I can't say that I am sad about that. If you make up, if the global regime makes up states and then loses those states, how can we be upset about that? Now, I mean, if you're going to take that back too far, then who knows what would happen. But yeah, I mean, in our lifetimes, Ukraine was created in our lifetimes as the global regime proxy state that it is now. And not my lifetime, but within the lifetime of people who are living, Israel was created. And then there are places like, South Sudan and Guyana, and you can keep going. But let's move on from that just slightly. This is Donald Trump on Air Force One. I think it was yesterday, but it might have been today. The post, yeah, it's from yesterday. So here we have Trump on Air Force
One. Level of the delegation that the Russians sent to Turkey.
I don't know anything about it. I'm not disappointed in anything. Who are you from?
BBC News.
I'm not disappointed. What would I be disappointed? We just took in $4 trillion, and he says, are you disappointed about a delegation? I know nothing about a delegation. I haven't even checked. Look, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay? And obviously he wasn't going to go. He was going to go, but he thought I was going to go. He wasn't going if I wasn't there. And I don't believe anything's going to happen, whether you like it or not, until he and I get together. But we're going to have to get it solved because too many people are dying. Thank you.
So nothing's going to happen until Trump and Putin get together. And he was going to go if I went, and I was going to go if he went. And then they both didn't go. And that was teased at and hinted at all week, that the two of them might show up there. And then of course, the war would be ended. When they come together, the quote unquote war will be ended. It's very apparent now. And so they made the world think that they were both going to show up in Istanbul for these meetings this week. And they didn't. And Zelensky throughout the week and throughout the last couple of weeks has been talking about how there's no way that they're going to come to any sort of peace negotiation where Russia then gets to keep these territories. But those territories are already Russia. There's absolutely no way this is going to end without those being Russia. So Zelensky is asking for something that definitely can't happen. And this is one of those moments where you have to wonder, Zelensky is an avatar for Ukraine and for this Ukraine war, Putin's very brutal invasion, whatever. Is he working on behalf of what my friend Burning Bright calls the sovereign alliance, but we could also just think these different sovereign states or the anti-regime movement worldwide, broadly, or whatever. The comedic actor would then be representing the worst picture possible of them while still being aligned with their goals. If he's under control by our side, if he's under control by that side, same thing. He's still an avatar. He's still a comedic actor, but then he's representing their interests in a very clear way. And their interests are so untenable that he is making the project look awful as a result. So again, we don't know how the extent of control from our side in that situation, but in either scenario, it's still totally under control because anything they try to do to improve the situation for themselves backfires and improves the situation for our side, right? And many such cases. We've talked about this dynamic for a very long time. It's an incredibly relevant dynamic. You got to understand. And, maybe patriots in control. Are patriots in control of absolutely everything? Probably not. that would be a very strange world. And if that were true, then there would be a whole lot of moral issues on the other side about how things are going. And these are all interesting conversations for some time in the future, or, you know, at least a future episode. We got a lot to still plow through here. The last bit on Trump and Putin and Ukraine. This is RT from yesterday. Putin-Trump meeting imminent, says a White House official, and this being Sebastian Gorka. So, I mean, however much credence you want to give to that, I think he's probably right in this case. But this could have just been part of the talking up of the potential for Trump and Putin to get together, because who knows what that causes as a response. But Gorka said deals are all about timing. When the time is right, that's when the president is in the room with Putin. He stated, meanwhile, while maintaining that the right moment is imminent. Yes, and it would be, I think, time to wrap this whole thing up. I mean, it's been in stages of ridiculousness for such a long time. We just keep hearing about these negotiations and the rare earths and these parts of quote unquote Ukraine and whether Ukraine's going to get them back. None of the regime's goals are ever going to be accomplished. The situation at the end of this is going to be just like we talked about in the China trade deal the other day. The deal that was in place prior, with probably greater advantages at this point for the Russian side. Whatever they had worked out then to have dealt with all of this, you'd think that they would get more concessions at this point. And Ukraine will be continually weaker. So let us talk about Poland for a few minutes. And I'm going to actually, before we get into the Trump trip part, I think I'm going to be able to circle this whole thing back around, including this, the color revolutions, Ed Martin, and Cutter. Going to bring it all the way around. I think I'm going to be able to do that. We shall see. And it is with a post that I told myself I was going to grab, but did not grab. It's not going to take me too much time to find it, though, and then we will keep on keeping on. Come on. Come on. There we are. All right, so I'm all set for that when I need it. But right now, let us go to this article on Poland, and I thank my good friend CanCon this morning for drawing my attention to this. And this is kind of a hobby horse for me. So I have more interest in this story than he does. He is interested in the populism aspects and the election part of this. I am interested in the fakeness of this government and what they are doing in a narrative sense to affect an outcome potentially of a fake election in Poland. So, New York Times, is there political life after populism? Poland may be the test. Now, if you've been a longtime listener to this show, you will know that last year I spent an extraordinary amount of time covering elections in foreign countries. And we did that to pick up all sorts of different dynamics from those narratives to see how it works in other countries and how it might work in our fake election that we had in 2024. That's one part of it. The other part is to prove again, because I think the model needs to be proven again and again and again, because again, I'm saying again too many times now, it is a departure from anything that you might find in authoritative sources or the normie sphere, which is why it's important to reiterate it multiple times and give proof to it repeatedly. The same playbook plays out in the rest of the world. Different aspects in different countries at different times. Granted, obviously, the characters are different and adjustments are made in the scripts for the individual countries and the individual situations. But underlying all that are the same stories in the same playbook playing out in all of these countries. And we're going to see more of that right here. Oh, cool. All my highlights went away. I think I will roughly remember them. Yes, I will. The mayor. So this is an election for the new president of Poland. And one of the people running is this guy, Rafał Rysowski, I want to say is maybe how you say his name. Polish names are not my thing. The mayor, Rafał Trzaskowski, at a campaign rally in Poland's conservative rural borderlands near Ukraine, made no mention of gay or abortion rights or of any of the other issues dear to progressives in the Polish capital and that serve as a red rag, I guess that would be red flag, to many right-wing residents of the countryside. And I should go back. This is there political life after populism? Poland may be the test. And so what you're seeing now is a description of that dynamic. They are going away. They're trying to appeal to the center and not seem like a crazy leftist, the regime candidate, that is. Instead, he spoke about the war in Ukraine, the need for a strong and powerful Poland, and plans to upgrade the military. The crowd waved red and white Polish flags that Mr. Zrakowski's team had handed out to ensure that TV cameras framed their candidate in a patriotic tableau. Okay, so they are already conscious of the television coverage of the event, and therefore they hand out flags and they avoid all the regime-oriented issues that they nonetheless support. They pretend to be patriotic when they are not patriotic. They are European Union types. In Poland, Mr. Rysowski, whatever, sorry, guy, hopes to slow sorry. I'm telling you, man, I hit that 2-hour mark. Maybe I should just start doing 2-hour shows instead. In Poland, Mr. Trzaskowski's, he hopes to slow Europe's Trump-empowered tide of right-wing populism by wrapping himself in the Polish flag, at least at campaign stops outside Warsaw and liberal cities in the West. Though not responsible for setting policy, the largely ceremonial Polish presidency has veto powers that can make plenty of trouble for a sitting government. The outgoing conservative president, Andrzej Duda, has used that power extensively to derail legislation passed by parliament. So the president has veto power. The Polish constitution was set up, I think it was like 1989, by the regime, installed a government that did not have a wide public mandate. They did not even have, they had a plurality of a minority, okay? They didn't even represent 25% of the country, and they still installed that government. And so with that government, they have the presidency, and then they have the parliament, which is like our Congress. And they continue, as I've mentioned many times, putting forward Prime Minister Donald Tusk as the leader of the country. But he's not the leader of the country. He's the leader of the parliament. He's basically like the Speaker of the House. And you might remember during the fake and illegitimate Biden administration, we saw Nancy Pelosi flying to places like Taiwan to conduct foreign policy. Why is that? Let's continue. But bear in mind, this is the position that Duda holds right now. They have veto powers. Also, they control the military. So that is enough power. And that makes the election to replace him a critical test of whether Poland's centrist government, led by Prime Minister Donald Tusk, can unwind the legacy of its populist predecessor. So they're trying to get rid of Trump's guy, Duda. And when they replace him, then the agenda gets installed. This is going to be the Trojan horse. He is not representing that agenda outwardly, but nonetheless, it is the agenda. Mr. Tusk has been cited as an example of how to turn back the rising tide of right-wing populist nationalism in Europe or in countries as disparate as Mexico and the United States. Mr. Tusk, a veteran centrist politician and former senior European Union official, took office in December after the previous governing party, Law and Justice, lost its parliamentary majority. He promised to, quote, chase away the darkness, end quote, and repair the damage he said had been done by 8 years of hard right nationalist rule. The new government, he pledged, would restore judicial independence, media pluralism, women's rights, and civil debate, all of which Polish liberals see law and justice as having severely undermined. The previous government introduced a near total ban on abortion, stacked the judiciary with loyalists, removed or gutted independent oversight bodies, and turned public broadcasting into a propaganda bullhorn. And that is all of those things. That is what they are accusing Donald Trump of doing and attempting to do. But Mr. Duda, a firm ally of law and justice, has thwarted many of Mr. Tusk's plans, also a visitor to Trump Tower, while Trump, quote unquote, wasn't president. He has repeatedly vetoed legislation passed by Mr. Tusk's center-right coalition in Parliament or sent it for judicial review by courts stacked with previous government's appointees. And Mr. Tusk's coalition does not have the 3/5 majority it would need to override his vetoes. So sad. Let us skip down. I'm trying to remember exactly where. Yeah, here we are. Mr. Duda is term limited, but among the 13 candidates running, 2 conservatives who want to continue blocking Mr. Tusk's program are polling in second and third place behind Mr. Drzazowski. They are Karol Nawrocki, a candidate backed by Law and Justice, and Sławomir Mencen of Confederation. Mr. Trump received Mr. Nawrocki at the White House in early May, granting him an honor that has been denied to Mr. Tusk. They posed for photographs, giving a thumbs up. While both the liberal frontrunner and the law and justice candidate have talked tough on security, Mr. Nawrocki has had more success playing up his tough guy credentials, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And they note that he has, it has been, the people have been reminded many times that he signed LGBT plus an LGBT plus declaration for Warsaw. And they say he is seen as a privileged Warsaw progressive, which is why they're waging the media campaign, not only in Poland, but abroad, and giving the optical cues so that people outside Poland can see, oh yes, they're very centrist and very patriotic. No, they're not. They're just regime communists ready to implement the same agenda. Now, the opposition, Nawrocki, is Trump supported, and the other person running is not the Trump candidate. So why are they running? Well, the third party candidate's going to be said to have taken votes away from the conservative, right? Because that's the conservative. So the conservatives, they are the majority, but they split among these 2 candidates. So, you know, we're going to have to install our regime candidate. That's quite something. So we're going to see how that goes. That'll be on Sunday, I guess. My friend Brian also brought this to my awareness. I haven't had a chance to watch the full Ed Martin interview yet, but this is an interesting clip talking about Poland. This is from the Tucker Carlson podcast.
Democracy is sacred. People are very upset when you want to make sure that elections have integrity. That's weird.
I love when you do this Tucker move. It's weird. It's weird only if you impute good intentions to these people, right? I mean, so true. It is weird then.
No,
but
you're right.
It's totally predictable. I mean,
of course,
all around the world, by the way, they're watching this happen. You know, Poland right now, they're in the midst of, they're trying to take Poland out. Obama is in Poland. There's an election in a week.
Of course.
Obama's in Poland. I had a whistleblower.
Well, why do you think that is?
I know. I had a
with Radek Sikorsky and Applebaum's husband.
I had a whistleblower come into my office, and they were telling me the story that every couple of months, Samantha Powers would arrive with USAID money to this country. I won't say which one. And I said, "You guys know who Samantha Powers is?" Of course we do. She was arriving with the money, and they knew it was sort of the beginnings of a color revolution. It's not lost on the world, right? It's not at all lost. The question is, are we going to get all of it out? Are we going to name it and then hold some people accountable? People say, are you going to walk people out in cuffs? Right now, I'd be happy to have just people know their names, right? I'd like the cuffs later if they commit a crime. But right now, people don't even know their names. And the question is whether we can even get through the information storm that we're in to get that out.
Well, I mean, the early returns are not good.
All right. So you can hear that all the elements of the color revolution are in place. Obama, Soros, Samantha Power, which is basically like Victoria Nuland. That you can think of those relatively the same. He mentions that Radek Sikorski is involved. He is a Polish politician, I think European Union as well. We've talked about him before as the husband of Anne Applebaum. And here is a reminder of who Anne Applebaum is. She's a writer for The Atlantic who writes articles like, "This is why dictatorships fail," about Donald Trump. She has been freaking out about Donald Trump. She is a Russia hater of the First Order. And you can see now what is going on in Poland. It's going to be really interesting to hear about the results of that election. And I think we are going to, hopefully we'll have some news on that and something interesting to talk about on Monday. This is just quickly so you can understand the sides here. This is from Poland Daily a few months back, early February, at the Munich Security Conference. It talks about Sikorski and Trzaskowski in Munich, but why no photo with Soros? Because they met with George Soros. So they took these pictures and published them together. There's the two of them. And then they had a meeting with Alex Soros, and I just figured I would show this. Oh, geez. He has a whole series of these. Oh, they embedded this Instagram. Oh, my gosh. He's got a slideshow in his Instagram. This is Alex Soros meeting with all of the commies at the Munich Security Conference. That's the same conference. Is that Lisa Monaco? Who is that? I think that might be Lisa Monaco. That was the same conference where J.D. Vance really took it to the Europeans and accused them of censorship. J.D. Vance talks tough in Europe. Europe is afraid of J.D. Vance. Yeah, okay. I'm sure that they are quaking in their boots about J.D. saying mean things to them. All right, let us continue. This is, so we talked about Trump in Saudi Arabia the other day. And then Trump traveled to Qatar and then the United Arab Emirates. And we're going to get into the trip stuff in Qatar and the UAE. But I wanted to do this as a preference so that I can then wrap up this whole section together. And then we'll get into the trip. This is Matt Gaetz on the War Room with Steve Bannon yesterday. Short clip. Tells you what the deal in Qatar is or was.
Just spreading money around basically Europe, the United States, and other places to kind of buy people off or to look the other way. Is Mark Levin and these guys right that we're looking the other way of the guys that finance the Muslim Brotherhood just because it's convenient or easy for us to do that?
I mean, you asked me if I believed Qatar had funded the Muslim Brotherhood, and my answer was not any more than we have. I mean, like, oh, what? America's now going to say funding the Muslim Brotherhood means you get disqualified from the global stage, or like paging Huma Abedin. Paging Hillary Clinton.
Matt Gaetz is breaking news here. Just spreading money around.
So there is some of the description of what Qatar is. Is Qatar going to be cut off from the conversation completely by the same standards that we would then ourselves have to be cut off from the conversation? It's a good question. So the idea being that Qatar is a state funder of terrorism. Well, who's funding the terrorism? That is always the question. You can't just say Iran is funding terrorism or Qatar's funding terrorism or describe things this way. That's not what we do on this show, at least. And I would suspect that many of you have adopted this viewpoint by now that I've been preaching it for the last 4 or 5 years. Good twin, evil twin. Well, good. I've only put it in that framing since early 2022. And I remember that because the first time I ever actually brought it up on a show was with Kash Patel in an interview from, I think it was February 2022. But yeah, good twin, evil twin. Centralization versus decentralization. You have to focus on factions within nations rather than nations by name. So the idea that Qatar was a funder of terrorism is only relevant to the extent that the faction that was funding terrorism is the faction that Trump is talking to. And if it's not, then it doesn't matter. Of course, it's not. So I wrote the other day, on Truth Social. And I want to make sure that I have this and I have this little picture that I need before we get into it. And now we're good. Okay. So to Truth Social, this is my post the other day. Qatar, a regime proxy state, is now fully aligned with America, Trump, and the coalition, however informal, of sovereign nationalist leaders leading sovereign nationalist anti-regime states. It should be clear that Trump is not selling arms and making deals with the same faction of Qataris and adjacent interests that the Bushes, Clintons, Obama, nor the fake President Joe Biden were dealing with. This is, again, proof of the necessity of the good twin, evil twin lens and paradigm rather than a constant regime-inculcated focus on the names of countries. Now apply this to who was receiving arms in Ukraine via Trump versus the evil twin regime faction controlling Kyiv, and the whole Ukraine, quote unquote, war takes on an entirely different meaning, a meaning that is inaccessible when focused on country names rather than actual sides. And we can let the post go there, but because the rest of it addresses the people who are unwilling to look through this lens or just haven't figured out how the world actually operates. And it's not just this country does this to this country. Retarded. But they're all still in the normie sphere. Everybody still operates that way because all the disseminators of the central narrative operate that way, because that way obscures the fact that the battle that's actually happening in the world is between factions that differ morally on how the world should be run, and politically, of course, too, but primarily morally. We have a faction of globalists, scientific materialists, atheists, nihilists, Satanists, wanting to create a one world global government that controls absolutely everything. And the people are useless eaters or cattle, or, you know, there are other names for the people that don't matter at all to certain other people. And opposing that, we have people who want to be sovereign nationalist leaders in sovereign nationalist countries, which is the only way to understand this sort of thing. And this interaction proves it. Okay. Trump is making deals with people in Qatar. Are they the same people that the Bushes, Clintons, Obamas, and whatever the fake president was doing were dealing with in good relations? No, of course not. Okay. There are two totally divergent worldviews and two totally divergent factions. So it's a matter of who's working with which faction, which is why now you hear Donald Trump is making all of these concessions to this terrorist state. Now, if you take that same idea and understand Ukraine, then you understand there's an ethnic civil war in Ukraine for the last 11 years now, 10 years. And Trump has many times bragged about how he was supplying Ukraine with missiles while Obama was supplying them with blankets. Now, if the Donbass region and those independent republics on the border of Russia are Ukraine, quote unquote, and he's supplying them weapons, that's an entirely different group of people than would be supplied weapons by the global regime, pursuing an entirely different and oppositional set of goals. Okay. And I've talked about this in the podcast, but probably not in 2.5 or 3 years, because, you know, Trump's bragging about that for a reason, and he's throwing it in their faces for a reason. And to the extent that Ukraine is being armed today, I would posit that it is those same factions that Trump was arming who are being armed for their defense so that Russia doesn't have to do it. And I guess this will come out in the wash in the future, potentially, or it won't. I mean, it's possible that I'm wrong, just to put that out there. I'm not saying that I know this. I cannot prove this to you. But if you think about these dynamics and how they actually work, and the only ways that this could make any sense, and if you understand devolution, and you can disagree with it if you like, but under that framework, what I have just described makes complete and total sense and is totally morally justifiable. Okay. And it seems like with these sorts of deals being made, that is just a much better and maybe the only way to parse any of this. And so I will leave that up to you and how you would like to parse that and whether or not that makes sense to you. And you can let it rattle around in your brain for as long as you like and decide that I am right or decide that I am wrong. And I will back you up on that. It's your call. You believe whatever you want to believe. Now, before we get into the trip, I am going to pause briefly for a word from our friends over at this here free speech platform, Rumble. Still haven't tried 1775 coffee? Now's your shot. The 1775 starter kit just dropped. Only 1,000 units. You're getting the bold dark roast that hits harder than a CNN fact check, the smooth medium roast, and the Vitality mushroom coffee for clean energy and laser focus, no crash. All single origin, small batch, toxin free, and mold free. Plus, you're also getting a gold spoon clip because freedom isn't scooped with plastic, a frother strong enough to stir up your coffee and your mother-in-law's political opinions, and a black 1775 tumbler that says, I don't take life advice or caffeine from a woke sea witch. And I think that they must mean Starbucks. $170 worth of coffee and gear, yours for $99. This is for the ones who've been watching 1775 blow up on Rumble, wondering if it's actually worth it. Spoiler alert, it is. Go to 1775coffee/studio. Sorry, 1775coffee.com/studio and get your starter kit before they're gone. Bold beans, clean fuel, and a morning routine that stands for something, just like Rumble does. Start your day with coffee that actually backs what you believe. Alrighty then. We've done it, everybody. We've done it. We got through it. Okay. Let us keep going. This is how Axios presented Trump's trip yesterday. And this is, I'm going a bit out of chronological order, so forgive me on that. But I thought this would be an interesting framing. Biden officials awed by Trump's rule-breaking Middle East moves. He's breaking the rules? Well, whose rules? Donald Trump is the plenary authority on American foreign policy. It's not possible for Donald Trump to break the rules because Donald Trump makes the rules. Is he violating the Constitution? No. Just how things are done. President Trump's recent series of audacious foreign policy moves have astounded even some of his harshest critics. Just in the Middle East and just in the past week, Trump has met with a leader the U.S. officially considers a terrorist, announced he'll lift all sanctions on Syria, and cut a truce with the Houthis, plus a hostage deal with Hamas, both of which excluded Israel. Biden administration veterans who spoke with Axios raised questions about Trump's motivations, but grudgingly saluted his boldness. Gosh, I wish I could work for an administration that could move that quickly, one admitted. He does all this, and it's kind of silence. It's met with a shrug, says Ned Price, a former official under Biden. He has the ability to do things politically that previous presidents did not because he has completely unquestioned authority over the Republican caucus. No, Ned, that's not the reason. Though it may be in some sense true, the Republican caucus doesn't matter because the people's mandate is for Donald Trump. It's not for Republicans. People don't care. Most MAGA supporters, especially ones who are awakened, don't give two shits about Republicans anymore. Okay? It's fine. If we want to keep using the Republican Party as a vehicle, fine. You can go through and find historical instances where the Republican Party was good or stands for the proper principles or whatever it is. Okay? So fine. But no one cares about the congressmen and senators if they are opposing Donald Trump. So they have no ability to oppose Donald Trump. Therefore, his power cannot be derived from their going along with him. Doesn't even make sense. but he's not going to admit what the real power is. The real power is that Donald Trump has real power. Okay. And the American military is behind him. And these other powerful nations are operating in league with him, or at least not operating in opposition to him. You can see the deals being formed. That's what all these optics are about. You can see him presented over and over as king of the world. You can see him presented to the most powerful countries in the Middle East and the wealthiest countries in the world as king of the world, and they treat him as king of the world. That's where his power comes from, not from his control over the Republican caucus, you moron, or more aptly, you liar. It's hard not to be simultaneously terrified at the thought of the damage he can cause with such power and awed by his willingness to brazenly shatter so many harmful taboos. So he is turning everything upside down on them. On issue after issue, Trump is taking steps no recent president would have even considered. He abandoned the unified Western position to back Ukraine as long as it takes by negotiating directly with Putin and declaring that Kyiv will never get Crimea back and must cut a deal now. He inserted himself directly in the recent Kashmir crisis, something past administrations have avoided so as not to antagonize India. But Trump's not antagonizing India because Modi's his friend. And the regime is what creates kinetic conflict and terrorist incidents. So if you understand the proper dynamic, then there's no risk whatsoever for Trump doing this. He endorsed direct talks with Iran and shrugged off hawks at home and abroad who tied the Obama and Biden administration in knots. It helps that many of them, like Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu, are loath to cross Trump. Oh, so it's his power definitely does not just come from the Republican caucus. On Syria, Trump's own State Department has espoused a policy similar to the Biden administration's before it. Sanctions relief might be possible if militant turned statesman Ahmed al-Shara's government met a number of criteria, such as suppressing extremist groups. That meant that somewhat perversely, the new administration was being strangled by sanctions imposed on the dictator they toppled. But it was also just the way these things work until Trump decided it wasn't. And also that al-Shara is a puppet. When Assad returns, this will be the perfect vehicle by which Trump has righted the situation there without dealing with the Assad is not a bad guy case to be made to the world. So we can go drive right around that narrative problem that Assad has presented, or the coverage of Assad for a long time has presented. And it's actually kind of tactically brilliant. It's, I'm sure Assad wasn't too happy to have to step back, but I can see why they did it. I don't like Trump's motivations for a lot of things that he does, Rhodes continued. But one thing you will say is he's not tied to the constant fear of some bad faith right-wing attacks or stupid blob type. We don't do this. We must leverage the sanctions for blah, blah, blah. No, sometimes you just have to try something different. So that's awfully shocking to see Ben Rhodes saying that and saying, I don't know why Joe Biden didn't do this. These things he said on the Pod Save America podcast, and that used to be called Keeping It 1600. And David Plouffe, who we talked about earlier, used to be a frequent guest on that podcast, as well as Ben Rhodes is. All these guys are in that kind of Obama bro set. All right. So Trump broke all the rules in the Middle East. Now, I just want to hit this real quickly and encourage you all to take a look if you want to go more deeply into it. But just this afternoon on Truth Social, Donald Trump posted about some of the response to his speech in Saudi Arabia that you might recall me saying the other day was, I think, one of the greatest speeches he's ever given. And I would put it on par with UN speech, World Economic Forum speech. And if I thought about it, maybe the first inauguration, I think his speech in November 22, announcing that he was going to, quote unquote, run again in the fake campaign for a fake election was also a good speech. But here are some of the comments. JD exclamation point said, President Trump's speech in Saudi Arabia was the best articulation of a smart, realistic foreign policy I've ever heard from an American leader. Nice job, JD. Newt Gingrich said, or quotes Mark Halperin in saying, Trump's Tuesday speech in Saudi Arabia, which shockingly gets almost zero coverage in American media, was one for the ages, with some observers not unreasonably calling it extraordinary, and some supporters saying it was one of the best and most important addresses by a U.S. president in many years. It warrants your time to watch it in full if you have not, to understand Trump's unusual and distinctive worldview. And even Megyn Kelly said, wow, just listen to Trump's message. It's truly the dawn of a new day. And that's because whoever this commie or whatever is said, I rarely praise Trump, but this is a genuinely incredible speech. And you got to love how these people in 2025 are still making sure to let everybody know, to preface, hey, I don't like Trump too. I don't like Trump too, but I have to say this good thing about it. Thanks, guys. What great support. All right, let's get into some of the video of this meeting, and hopefully I'll be able to, gosh, I have a lot because there are so many good images of these last 2 days, but I'll try to speed through these things relatively quickly so we can make some real headway as we come down the home stretch here. So this is from still Saudi Arabia. Trump greets Saudi officials at the royal court in Riyadh. And this was a big deal in some parts of the internet because all of these military officials were also saluting Donald Trump. And the people who spend most of their time playing Match online suggested that this was an enormous big deal because this means he's supreme commander of the world. And hey, listen, I mean, I say he's king of the world, so I guess it could be for that reason. But also, I've talked with some military people, and they're like, well, no, saluting foreign presidents is not out of bounds for what normally happens. C Masters gifted 5 subscriptions. So thank you on behalf of myself, and thank you on behalf of the recipients of those subscriptions. Let us continue. Now, we mentioned just a second ago in that Axios article that Trump met with the quote-unquote Syrian president, al-Shara, the character who was formerly ISIS and then also, or not ISIS, Al-Qaeda. I always say that wrong. So it's Al-Qaeda, former Al-Qaeda terrorist who is also woke. Remember that story from when they installed this guy? Trump meets Syrian president, urges him to establish ties with Israel. This is Reuters the other day. So that alone is interesting. There's Trump meeting this character, kind of the Volodymyr Zelensky of Syria or whatever. And I don't want to spend time lingering on that. But this I found particularly interesting in light of Trump saying that he's going to ease those sanctions, which will bring them back into the world economy and the non-regime economy, more importantly, perhaps. Unusual whales on X, formerly Twitter. The World Bank confirms that Saudi Arabia and Qatar have paid off Syria's outstanding debt. That's pretty amazing. So I guess Trump was in some sense involved with that negotiation as well. I mean, it's all just part of the same whole. So their debts to the regime have been erased, and now Syria is going to be welcomed back as a normal country, and perhaps even normalizing relations with Israel, an Abraham Accord for Syria. That's incredible. Let's keep going. I thought I had one more thing on the Abraham Accords. No, just Trump's encouragement of the normalization. Okay, let's go to his landing in Qatar. He had another fighter escort. And it's all going out on TikTok and Instagram with music and video. And even that stuff even pierces the normie sphere. I would imagine. Can't say because I'm not in the normie sphere, generally speaking. I mean, I don't see any Instagram, barely see any Twitter, don't see any TikTok, I don't see any Facebook. But honestly, this entire thing is not figuring out how to get the normies to vote Republican in 2028, despite the fact that the people playing Match Online seem to believe that's the point. Look at everybody waking up. Are they waking up or are they just becoming Republicans? I mean, this is quite a greeting. Can you imagine your country, and especially when you have systems of royalty, when you have emirs, etc., them rolling out the red carpet this way, or rolling out the purple carpet as we saw in Saudi Arabia? I mean, that's incredible video. That is a king's welcome. It's nothing short of a king's welcome. And I mean, we talked about last year, the Notre Dame Cathedral reopening, Trump presented as king of the world. The Vatican, Trump presented as king of the world. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and UAE, all of them, Trump presented as the king of the world. And we'll keep seeing this. Deny it, right? Call it whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's a little bit too, I don't want to call it groveling, because I'm not groveling. I'm just trying to state objectively. It is clear through the optics that we are being shown these important countries, these parts of the world, consider Donald Trump the king of the world, or at least a leader that they have to defer to in every situation. That's pretty incredible. And even if you want to say that, fine, he's on equal ground with these leaders, these are the leaders who have actual power in the world. And we're talking about Trump, and we're talking about Putin, and we're talking about Putin, we're talking about Xi, and we'll see whom else as we go along. But you've got MBS, you got Mohammed bin Zayed, and I mean, this is what it's all about. Then he's going to normalize relations with Iran and some of these other countries. If Saudi normalizes with Israel, I mean, we're talking a two-state solution potentially. It's got to happen. These countries all recognize Palestine as a state already. So you can't just wipe Palestine out. And you have to assume if there's going to be any sort of negotiation and compromise, that's going to leave a state of Israel as well. And so maybe Palestine takes the Sinai Peninsula and has their land there or something. Who knows what it's going to be? But you can imagine that these things have already been negotiated long ago in 2020 or earlier, agreed to by all these parties, and now they're being implemented and put in place despite political and potentially kinetic and other pushback from the global regime and regime elements in Israel and elsewhere. Okay. But you can see the image emerging. And we've talked about this image emerging now for 2.5, 3 years when it comes to these issues. Again, deny it if you like. Wait for the television to tell you if you want, oh, that thing's finally happened now. Or just live in the future where this stuff is already done, because it is already done. And we've been talking about it since the paragliding go-kart incident, if not earlier with some of these other countries. All right, let's continue. Where are we here? Trump red carpet. This one's funny. This clip is called Nice House. Dang. I suppose it just made it harder for you to look at that thing. But the entire time I was thinking about all this is like, all I could think was, we actually don't have any way that we could show off America to a foreign leader like this, and no one who would do it until now, because Trump says he's fixing Washington, D.C., and he's going to make it beautiful so that when foreign leaders come, they can see a beautiful city. This is the example. Look what Trump is being treated to in these other countries. This is Qatar at night. Now, for those of you who are doing the audio version, this is an enormous procession down this tree-lined boulevard, palm tree-lined boulevard, camels and horses and people in formal dress, and then a long motorcade. Gosh, the dances, the music, the ceremony, all of it. It's really quite a display. So we talked about the sword dance from 2017 when Trump was on that tour of the Middle East. Here is Cutter's version. All of that is for Donald J. Trump. And it's not just to make him feel happy. And, you know, they can say that Trump loves this stuff because it feeds his ego, etc. But it's not just that. It's not just that. Sorry, guys. Got to be grown-ups at some point. It's not just that. These countries see Donald Trump this way, and they are proudly aligning with him on the world stage. And you have Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz, and Sir Keir Starmer in the "Is that Coke?" on the train display a few days ago after meeting with a comedic actor in Ukraine who has been losing a war for almost 3.5 years. War, in quotes. What a clown show. Think about what the rest of the world actually is, the power display that counters this. There is none. There's none. They do Instagram events and try to show off the Eiffel Tower. And they have their little conferences on their big stages. Oh, the world is coming together for our G20 event. The world's coming together for our World Economic Forum, our United Nations. Oh, we have a summit in Los Angeles. Clown show. Look at that. The answer is right in front of you. You don't even need to know anything about geopolitics. And again, that's part of the point of the comms op within the information war. I actually forgot to mention this about that Ed Martin clip with Tucker. The last part of that clip, he talks about how they need to win the information. He called it storm. And they need to be successful in the information storm because the system can't provide the proper results, and certainly not on a proper timeline. Therefore, the information war must be won. And so now they're taking the gloves off and actually trying to win that war rather than saying, oh, we can't talk about that because that's the result, or that's involved in some investigation like 10 years from now. Yes, you can. It's a government of, by, and for the people, right? If that's what it is, then the people actually should be able to know everything the government knows so that they can weigh in on all those decisions. So of course we should be able to know. And that's also how you win the information war. Okay. Let us continue to this brief breakdown of the deal in Qatar. Trump's $1.2 trillion Qatar deal. $96 billion to Boeing and GE, the largest aviation order ever. 150,000 plus American jobs annually. Million plus jobs total impact. Real paychecks for real Americans. 8.5 billion from McDermott Energy. 97 billion Parsons infrastructure projects. 1 billion quantum computing investment. This is just the start. Defense wins. 3 billion for Raytheon and General Atomics. First international buyer of FS Lids anti-drone system. MQ-9B aircraft exports. And here we go, skipping down. $2 billion trade surplus with Qatar. These are things the fake news media won't tell you, according to Rod Martin. $3.3 billion Qatar investment in the U.S. in 2023, 20 plus years of positive trade balance. And again, they were going after Qatar as like some terrorist state, our enemies. He notes 1.2 trillion from Qatar, another 600 billion from Saudi Arabia. So that puts us at 1.8 trillion. And then they had the UAE stuff. Trump says 4 trillion. He might be overshooting it, but does that really matter? I think not. Real Purdy won $50. Hey, Chris, thank you. I'm getting here late, but I'm excited to listen. Are you going to the Bitcoin conference? Have a great weekend. Thank you so very much for your generous support. I am not going this year to the Bitcoin conference. I am with travel in March to a GART and then travel a couple weeks ago to a GART. Like, I'm one of those people who actually doesn't like traveling. I don't like traveling. I'm trying to accomplish things in my work and stuff that's going to lead me into my new avenues in my future. Okay. And I accomplish that stuff best when I'm at home and working and grinding away. And that's all I do. It's all I want to do. Don't want to do other stuff. And I definitely don't want to ever travel. I go to the GARTs because it's nice to connect with the audience. And I'm very committed to the Badlands project that I care a lot about. And I care a lot about my friends in Badlands. And that's why I go. But otherwise, I like to be home. So no, I'm not going to Bitcoin. I went to Bitcoin last year. I get it. I like the speeches. There are some people there that I like listening to, but the Bitcoin conference is Bitcoin focused. The people there that are networking are crypto focused, well beyond Bitcoin. And so I have no need to engage with that. I don't need to engage with the corporate aspects, the people displaying at the conference. I would like to see some of the speeches, but to travel to see speeches, not worth it. I would love to go see and hang out with G Money, who's a good friend of mine. But besides that, it doesn't make sense for me in my life. So that's the long answer. Let us continue. A few more video clips, and yeah, I think we can get through this in 15 minutes, and I'm going to try because I don't want this to be a 3.5 hour podcast, especially not because it's already late, and I don't want to run into, I know Badlands shows are starting soon. If not, I know Liberty Den's in an hour and a half. I don't know. I don't have the schedule in my head. So sorry. Let's keep going. All right. So before leaving Qatar, a military flyover. So just another aspect of the display for Trump. You saw Air Force One on the tarmac, a long red carpet and a long line of people lining that red carpet. And then, I don't know, a dozen or so military jets flying over the runway, ostensibly to be the protectors of the plane of the dignitary, in this case, the king of the world, Donald Trump. And then he heads from Qatar to the UAE. This is the entrance to Abu Dhabi. If I can stop attempting to share things the wrong way. Here we are. Now, you might be thinking, was that Oscar the Grouch? I don't think that it was, but this is quite a display from the military and beyond. This is what Trump walks into. And we're going to keep this moving. He's getting a tour of some kind of palace. I mean, look at this. It's unbelievable. And I thought to myself, in line with what I said earlier, where would we be able to create this sort of display for a foreign leader? And I remembered, oh yeah, Mar-a-Lago. It's fantastic. Let us continue. More of Abu Dhabi. Now you will notice these women, by the way, holding their long hair over and like shaking it, like making their hair dance. And so I'll leave that on the screen and read this post on X, formerly Twitter, from an account called 589 Bull. But he said, to everyone confused by the hair swinging ritual in Trump's UAE visit, that wasn't random. That wasn't a TikTok dance. That was ancient, intentional, and royal. Here's what it meant. The ritual is known in Gulf Arab culture, especially in the UAE, as part of a ceremonial welcome reserved for kings, heads of state, and those given the highest honor. The synchronized hair swaying by women is not a performance. It's a gesture of grace, pride, and spiritual blessing. It symbolizes honor, purity of intent, and in some interpretations, submission to a higher cause or protector. It's rare. It's sacred. You don't get this unless you're being received as a liberator or covenant figure. Donald Trump didn't walk into a normal greeting. He was flanked by military, tribal elders, and ceremonial dancers. This was a king's welcome. It sent a message to the world and especially to those watching in silence. He's not just back. He's the one we trust now. This was a global power shift wrapped in ancient tradition. And to be honest, if I was still on Twitter, that might earn 589 Bull a follow from me. And I am loath to follow anyone. So because I want to, like, I use these platforms to consume information. And so not as a place to make online friends. And so I want to be sure that I'm actually able to see parts of my feed, which is already a problem. So, but that was very good and very aligned with the case that we in Badlands have been making and that I have been making on this show for many years now. This is how he's being presented to the world. And it didn't start just this year and this term and not just since the fake election. Let's keep it moving. This post is from Hassan Sajwani, who is, I guess, some kind of journalist in the UAE on X, formerly Twitter. Breaking: President His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bestows U.S. President Donald J. Trump with the Order of Zayed, the UAE's highest civilian honor. I don't see how that can be considered anything short of a symbol of alliance. Imagine having to watch all of this as a member of the global regime. This I thought was, this is short and sweet, but I thought was particularly amusing. This is Trump, and he brought Stephen Miller on the trip and is introducing Stephen Miller to the very important people.
Every American deserves to see what an incredible evolution we are seeing in the Genesis right now.
So you see right here, this looks to be Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff, one of them. They're speaking to the UAE prince. It's quite funny. I believe it was the Saudi prince. This is a little color for you. There was some reporting that he was introduced to Deputy Chief of Staff James Blair, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, and the next Deputy Chief of Staff. And he said, how many Deputy Chief of Staff do you have? So
every American.
So that's Trump there with Stephen Miller. And I actually forgot I should read that caption. Although, you know what? He might have just been I've just been joking. I'm gonna save that, and I'll maybe follow up on that this weekend. I want to be sure that I'm not misreading that post as an actual quote from Trump rather than that guy making up something that Trump said. This is the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, and you can watch it be lit up all white and then American flag. What can you say? We're almost there. A segment from Trump's speech the other day. If I can only just find this. It is not saved. Now I'm really making myself quite angry. Here it is.
Peninsula, places like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Doha, Muscat. The transformations have been unbelievably remarkable. Before our eyes, a new generation of leaders is transcending the ancient conflicts of tired divisions of the past and forging a future where the Middle East is defined by commerce, not chaos, where it exports technology, not terrorism, and where people of different nations, religions, and creeds are building cities together, not bombing each other out of existence. We don't want that.
I think that is right in line with his speech the other day about the nation builders. He's saying these nations are transcending ancient conflicts. The compromises have been made. That is what brings the coalition together, is that finally these conflicts can go away because the global regime will have receded from those areas and their power has receded. Now, you can take that in a number of ways. Is the global regime going to be gone forever? Definitely not. I mean, it'll pop up. It'll try to increase in force and power and relevance, perhaps. Or maybe we're being dog walked into something just as bad, and this is all just the Great Reset. But it doesn't seem to be that way. And these countries, putting aside these ancient tribal conflicts and the rest of it, is awfully impressive. Now, as far as the title of today's episode goes, it is from this quote by Donald Trump. And I think that this is still when he was teasing the potential for a meeting in Istanbul between himself and Vladimir Putin.
It's a massive project, and it's going to be brought through the United States largely. And it's an honor to be here. And the last 4 days have been really amazing. I think they've been amazing. But it shows you where our country can go. And I want to thank all of my team, Howard, Scott, everybody. They've done an amazing job. So we'll be leaving tomorrow, as you know. Almost destination unknown. Because we're getting close. Could you be here? Could you be there? But probably going back to Washington, D.C. tomorrow. Some of you are going to be traveling with us. And I'm going to sign the guest book now, and we appreciate it. You've treated us, the media's treated us very fairly. Maybe because you're with me, I don't know, but they treated us very fairly. It's been an amazing trip. I don't think there's ever been anything like it. And it's a great honor to be with you tonight. It's my honor. Thank you.
So, destination unknown. And that makes me think immediately of one of my favorite punk songs of all time, Ruby Soho by Rancid. Yeah. And I'll leave it there because I know not everybody's a fan of the punk, especially in the ska era there, which I guess you could call kind of an influence there in Rancid's music. But destination unknown, Ruby Soho. Let us go to Howard Lutnick. We are winding this thing down. We are so close to being there. Actually, you know what? This is so good, but it's a few minutes long. So, all right. I think it's worth it. It'll be on the episode, and Let's do it. Howard Lutnick explains to Sean Hannity how important this Trump trip to the Middle East actually is. And hat tip to my friend, The Storm Has Arrived, who adds, the golden age is upon us.
Great to be here. Great to see you. Okay. Brilliant businessman in your own right. I say to people all the time, I was really nervous that so many semiconductors were coming from outside the country. I'm worried about rare earth minerals outside the country, pharmaceuticals manufactured outside the country, and artificial intelligence. Please explain it in your own words, because this is so pivotal to our economy moving forward.
Okay, so these are the best chips in the world. A chip is $40,000, and it's the size of your iPhone. So this is not a little thing. It goes into a supercomputer that's the size of Shaq. Okay, it's like a refrigerator size, right? It costs $3 million, 7 foot tall, so they're not going anywhere. No one's like sneaking them out the back door. That's not that kind of thing, right? They suck huge amounts of power, and that's when you put these things together, right? That's how you get artificial intelligence. So the idea was we would let our allies buy these gigantic chips, right? These gigantic chips, and only U.S. hyperscalers, Google, Microsoft, XAI, those are the kind of companies that can operate them, right? And only American cloud connects to it. So this is like an American export. Think of it like high-tech Boeing, right? Our semiconductors, our operators, our cloud in the UAE, and the UAE said, I'm going to invest $250 billion here, and I will build it in America. I'll do the same darn thing, $250 billion in America. So think about that. That is $500 billion for the good guys.
Okay, so there are people afraid of AI. They think that it will replace a lot of jobs, for example. You know, so, Elon Musk, a friend of yours, said that in 5 years, the best surgeons will be robotic. In other words, they will surpass the ability of a human surgeon, and then talking about medical cancer detection, all this stuff. A lot of people are not really up to speed. This is so critical for every economy, but then some people are afraid. Explain.
So if you think about it, there are factories in China with 1 million people working, because that's what their power is. They've got that human capital. In America, we don't have that human capital. We've got something different. So what we're going to do is we're going to build these automated factories, the high-tech factories of the future, and our people are going to work at the high-tech factories. Now, a $20 billion factory may only employ 3,000 or 4,000, but that means starting salary, $75,000. And this is for a technician. Right? So think about it. These AI things, they suck water, and they need water, right? And so they need a plumber, but not a plumber. They need like a HVAC specialist that starts at $100 grand. These are great jobs. And if you think of what President Trump has said, $10 trillion in investment, we're going to need 5 million of those jobs. So we've got to train people for the AI revolution that's coming. It's going to give us, Americans, are going to have the best jobs. It's going to be our foundation. It's the new industrial revolution, and it's driven by Donald Trump, and it's going to be amazing jobs for Americans.
Now, there's going to be there's sort of going to be another impact, a ripple effect in this. It needs so much energy. I heard it explained earlier today. You were in a meeting. I happened to sit in to learn and report on that meeting. The amount of energy that is going to be needed to power all of this is way beyond our wildest imagination. What does that mean? High-paying career jobs, energy. That means energy. We still use the same amount of coal, gas, and oil that we did, 100 years ago. We'll be using it 100 years from now. We have more energy than anyone else, right? That benefits Americans.
So, drill, baby, drill. That's one side. Mine, baby, mine. Refine, baby, refine. Right? We've got to create energy. It's going to be nuclear energy. You know how much the president doesn't like windmills, right? Because it's intermittent.
Loves windmills.
It's just not windy all the time. You can't operate on that kind of stuff. And look what happened to Spain and Portugal, right? They went black because they started going on stuff that you can't rely upon. Coal you can rely upon. Big, beautiful coal, right? Nuclear, right? These are the driving forces. Natural gas, amazing natural gas. We've got oil, natural gas,
more energy
coal,
than any other country,
and nuclear.
Okay,
We've got to go huge.
All right. So we will leave Lutnick there, but just singing the praise of all these deals that are being worked out. This is bringing the country into the golden age and doing it with all of these alignments around the world. Now I just realized, man, I downloaded this graphic earlier because it's really important to understand these alignments. Again, when we're talking about, are we being dog walked into the worst dystopia imaginable? And are we just being hoodwinked by the regime with Donald Trump as its like vehicle for our hoodwinking? I really don't think so. I'm just going to post this real quick. You can find this graphic by searching Qatar, probably, I think, in the information stream on Telegram. I posted this the other day and I posted it on Truth Social. I had ChatGPT break down for me the factions in Qatar with the Bushes, Clintons, Obamas, Bidens, etc., and then Trump. And you can look at the political leanings of the factions and the rest of it, and you can see quite clearly that Trump is operating with different people. So I forgot to mention that earlier, but I did want to highlight that. And then one quick thing before we go to X, formerly Twitter. This is Barack Ravid. President Trump confirmed a few minutes ago in a gaggle with reporters on Air Force One that the U.S. gave Iran a proposal for a nuclear deal. They have a proposal, and now they have to move quickly or something bad is going to happen, Trump said. So hard to imagine a trip that was more successful than that one, both optically and politically and financially as well, I guess. He's getting it done. Whatever complaints the media is going to try to put out about what Trump is doing, all the stories about how he's overstepping his constitutional authority and the rest of it, all of that. I don't use this word really, but it feels appropriate here. It's hogwash. It's nonsense, all of this. Look at what you're seeing. Unless all that's fake, and it doesn't seem to be fake, he is exactly what we have billed him to be. And you can see him being treated that way by the most powerful people in the world. Okay? The TV's not going to say it, but you can see it with your own eyes. It's not a different way than that. It's that way. And that is the basis for why we've been doing this for the last 5 years with this understanding. This is the situation. This is the world they're bringing into being. This is the multipolar, the fragmentation, the decentralization that I've been talking about with Good Twin, Evil Twin for well over 3 years. This is it. You can see it. And I think all of you are on board and understand that, which means once you've understood it, then you can guide your life by it, understanding that this is the world that's emerging. And beyond that, you just celebrate. Okay. Checking the chats quickly. Theory Conspiracy on X, $20. Great show, Chris. Thank you very much for your Rumble rant. His name says on X. Much appreciated. Thank you very much for that. Substack and YouTube, seems like people are hanging out there still and happy over there. Many nice things said. So I thank you very much. I've read your comments. I don't always have time to reply individually, especially if they're not germane to the topic. And I'm just not going to read compliments to me all day, but thank you very much for them. I see them. I notice them. I appreciate them. And with that, I will be back on Monday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden will never be president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Let you down. We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling. What?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.